You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. We're reading today from Justin Frank, Dr. Justin Frank's book, Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President. He's the guy who wrote Bush on the Couch and Obama on the Couch. He's a psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And the book just came out. This is from the introduction. There's no question that Trump is mentally unfit in ways that make him psychologically unsuited for the presidency. That in itself is a truly alarming turn of events. And I'd write the entire book in all caps if I thought that would better convey the sense of urgency with which it is written and should be read. Any number of troubling mental illness diagnoses and character evaluations can be and have been accurately applied to Trump. Both can vary from analyst to analyst, however, without necessarily sacrificing any of the accuracy. More to the point, the true value of a diagnosis is to determine an appropriate course of treatment, and there's no indication that any sort of treatment is a viable option. Trump on the Couch then seeks not simply to make the case that Trump is not well, but rather to show how he is unwell in ways that would have been of particular interest to the applied psychoanalysts whose investigation likely preceded our own, the Russians, and perhaps even their American allies or counterparts, who in the long tradition of intelligence gathering examined Trump's psyche and found an opportunity for exploitation. Trump's presidency caps a lifetime of dysfunction and disorder that is not likely to be healed while he is in office, just as Trump's ascendancy among voters gives expression to long-standing trends in the American electorate's psyche that are not going to be easily addressed. However, if we can identify certain aspects of these disorders and trends that may have contributed to Trump and his voters fusing into a shared belief system, then we have a better chance of fostering the kind of honest cultural discussion that will be necessary in order to contain and repair the damage that has already been done. Understanding Trump calls for a consideration of his psychodynamics almost certainly more rigorous than he has ever embarked upon on his own. Trump dismissed psychotherapy as a crutch in his 2004 Playboy interview. Years later, talking to biographer Michael D'Antonio, he described in greater detail a generalized aversion to introspection beyond the therapeutic setting. Quote, "I don't like to analyze myself because I might not like what I see," he told D'Antonio. "I don't like to analyze myself. I don't like to think too much about the past," end of quote. Even armed with a detailed family history, we can't capture Trump in action with only the tools of applied psychoanalysis. Like some of the most disturbed patients I've worked with, Trump is so erratic, constantly changing the topic, elevating the stakes, and raising the volume, that one doesn't know what to expect from him next. It's hard to imagine him in treatment. Even as the subject of an applied psychoanalytical investigation, he behaves like a patient who is simultaneously banging in the consulting room window, rattling on its door, ringing the phone, and texting or tweeting his demands for attention. Trump presents so many troubling affects that it's hard to remember them all. In the final weeks of the first year of Trump's presidency, Michael Wolff and David K. Johnston published accounts of the Trump White House that present a president with a startling number of disturbing characteristics. Any one of these demonstrable and suspected traits would raise calls for a psychoanalytic investigation if it was done on a layperson. In a president, in aggregate, they are truly cause for alarm. The list of worrisome, evident, and alleged attributes that emerge in these and other portraits is long. Narcissist, liar, racist, sexist, adulterer, baby, hypocrite, chiseler, tax cheat, outlaw, psychopath, paranoid, fraud, ignorant, vengeful, delusional, arrogant, greedy, contemptuous, unsympathetic, learning disabled, cruel, obstructor of justice, threat to the Constitution, traitor. The list is so long that it can be overwhelming. It's a challenge to remember the beginning by the time you make it to the end. There are times when I wish someone would help us remember all the troubling aspects of Trump's character and behavior, past and present, in a way that would encourage recognition of the totality of his pathology, rather than its component parts, which individually cause alarm before being temporarily forgotten when the next emergency presents itself. As an applied psychoanalyst, my task is not only to appreciate the full list, but also to ignore the big picture and focus on a single pathology at a time. Practitioners of applied psychoanalysis approach their subject as both theoretician and clinician. The theoretician endeavors to piece things together, to figure things out, while the clinician tries to approach each session capable of being surprised, as if his mind were a blank slate. The analysis in the following pages aspires to accomplish both goals: reviewing Trump's record with a clinician's eye, preparing to be surprised by the unexpected observation, and assembling these findings into a more comprehensive portrait. The image of hypothetical patient Trump rattling the consulting room door and banging on the window reminds us that President Trump doesn't want us to see the entire list at once. Not only that, but patients I've treated who are reminiscent of Trump cannot tolerate being inside the consulting room either. They leave my office whenever they feel unable to think their way through an anxiety-provoking interpretation, much the way Trump leaves press briefings when the questions get too close. Trump on the Couch by Justin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Boy, what a day. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. I have been reading the Mueller report, or the redacted version of it, this morning. And I'm sure probably many of you have been as well, plus keeping up with all the various media reports about this. It's an ongoing, kind of crazy fest. The Department of Justice released a PDF of the Mueller report with redactions that is not searchable. So NBC News says that they're trying to convert that into a searchable format that they can release that everybody will then want to play with. I'm guessing other news organizations are doing the same. But basically stuff is trickling in as people are going through this, because it just came out a little over an hour ago. And so just to some of these things, Bill Barr, as is his wont, as he did in 1992, when he lied about Iraq-gate, as William Safire repeatedly pointed out, as he did in 1992 when he recommended the pardon of 6 people involved with Iran-Contra, and thus the cover-up of the Reagan administration's attempts to use the hostages in Iran to win the election, to beat Jimmy Carter, and with regard to the Reagan-Bush administration's, basically the whole cover-up around that. When Bill Barr did that cover-up, when Bill Barr lied about, well, he did the same thing this morning. This guy is a professional cover-up. I've been telling you this for months. That when Bill Barr was named as the Attorney General, I started yelling about this, saying, back in '92, this guy was the guy who ran the cover-up for George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan. I mean, he's the guy who recommended the pardons of Ollie North and Elliott Abrams and everybody else. So anyhow, he comes out this morning, he says, oh, there was no collusion. He says it 7 times. Well, actually, the report doesn't say that there was no collusion. In fact, I'm not even sure they use that word, although it's not a searchable document, so I can't tell you that for sure. But basically, they say because the president wouldn't sit down for an interview and wouldn't answer follow-up questions, there were some things that they couldn't be sure of. They go on to note that, well, here, I'll just read it to you. This is, by the way, from the very same page that Barr quoted from in his initial letter. While the investigation identified numerous links between individuals with ties to the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign, the evidence was not sufficient to support criminal charges. Now, what Barr didn't tell you is why was the evidence not sufficient? Well, he goes on to say the investigation established that several individuals affiliated with the Trump campaign lied to this office and to Congress about their intentions with Russia-affiliated individuals in related matters. Those lies materially impaired the investigation of Russian election interference. So, yeah, we couldn't indict because they lied to us. Not only did they lie to us, elsewhere in the report it talks about how there were people using back-channel devices, like the way that Jared Kushner communicates with Mohammed bin Salman, the dictator of Saudi Arabia, using WhatsApp or using applications that don't store anything, in violation, by the way, of the law, the Presidential Records Act. And, so we've got that. This is, I think, so far the most shocking thing that I've seen. Konstantin Kilimnik is a Russian oligarch. He is not part of the Russian government. So, you go back to this original, while the investigation identified numerous links between individuals with ties to the Russian government, Kilimnik is not part of the Russian government. But in any case, here's a quote. This is from the Mueller report. Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. So here's Manafort laying out the entire election strategy for Donald Trump's election to a Russian oligarch. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. Now, we've sort of heard this so far, but then it goes farther. It also included discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. And Trump won by a total of what, 82,000 votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania? And we know that, foreign actors were penetrating or probing election computers. I'm curious what you're seeing. What's popping your eyeballs in what you're seeing, what you're reading, what you're hearing, and what you're thinking. The people lied to Mueller. They deleted evidence. They used encrypted devices, which is why is apparently why Mueller says we can't absolutely prove this. Secondly, one of the things that Barr said again in the press conference this morning, and he said before, is that the Mueller investigation chose not to prosecute Trump because there wasn't enough evidence, not because he was president. Well, in the report, they repeatedly say that, they can't prosecute Trump because he's president. The DOJ says you can't do that. They can't prove that Trump knew that Flynn was meeting with Kislyak before the swearing because again, they've been lied to. And there's been obstruction. But there is evidence that Trump knew that Flynn was meeting with Kislyak. This was, Kislyak was the Russian ambassador. Russia was under sanctions that had been imposed by Obama. Russia did not react to those sanctions, and the best guess about why they didn't react, this was after Trump was elected and before he was sworn in, the best guess as to why they didn't react is because they were told by somebody in the Trump circle, don't worry, when we get sworn into office on January 20th, we're going to take care of it, or January 5th, I guess it is, whatever the date is. We're going to take care of it. And now it turns out, yep, that's exactly what, or apparently that's exactly what Michael Flynn told Kislyak. Now, did Trump know about that? There is evidence that he knew about it and that he approved of it. It's just that they can't quite nail it all down. The report stated the evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that would need to be resolved if we were making a traditional prosecutorial judgment. But they weren't making a traditional prosecutorial judgment because, according to the rules that they were operating under, you can't prosecute the president. The report goes on to say, at the same time, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and applicable legal standards, we are unable to reach that judgment. In other words, if we thought that the Trump was innocent, we would say so. And we are explicitly not saying so. Trump, Barr comes out and says, oh, we came at this regardless of Trump being the president. I'm pretty sure that that's the quote that I heard him say. As Rod Rosenstein was standing there, blinking SOS with his eyes. I mean, he was either on drugs or somebody in the back had a sniper on him and he knew it. I mean, Rosenstein looked like, well, who knows? I mean, maybe he was terrified. Maybe he was breathless. Maybe he was giddy with excitement. Who knows? By the way, it turns out one of the speculations, one of the things that was asserted to the New York Times by people who worked with Mueller on the investigation, who had since left the Mueller investigation so they could speak to the New York Times on kind of deep background without breaking the law, basically what they said was that we wrote summaries for each one of these sections, and each one of these summaries you guys can use. I mean, these summaries are things that, when this report gets released, they can just be released to the public, which is what happened today, by the way. By and large, all of these early parts. Well, this is interesting. McGahn spoke with the president twice and understood the directive the same way both times, making it unlikely he misheard or misinterpreted the president. McGahn decided to quit because he didn't want to participate in what would have looked like a Saturday night massacre. I mean, this is amazing. And then several officials associated with the White House continued to lie about Russia matters. Our investigation was materially impaired into Russian election intervention because of these lies, essentially. It's pretty damn breathtaking. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania, you got some thoughts on this, Jared?
I'm just curious how much of this report is redacted and how much of it is actually, that we can see. Because I just saw a screenshot and it just showed the entire page was completely blanked out.
Yeah, there are a few. I have the entire report. I have printed about a third of it. We just got it an hour ago. And it's insane that they would release a report like this without it being searchable, but they did. And it looks to me like it's not that heavily redacted, but, ask me again in an hour. We're still going through it, right? We're still going through it. The amazing thing is that, the truly amazing thing is that the report says something completely different from what the Attorney General said and has been saying for several weeks. That and what that says to me is that the next step that Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, which is where all impeachments have to originate, is that it's time to impeach William Barr, the Attorney General. And one of the questions that I would like to ask the Attorney General in an impeachment hearing is, Mr. Attorney General, before you made your audition, your 19-page audition letter to Donald Trump, or before you met with Trump and told him that you wanted to be his Attorney General, did any of the billionaires close to Donald Trump or any corporations close to Donald Trump offer you or suggest or even imply to you that if you did this cover-up for Trump, there'd be a multi-million-dollar a year job waiting for you once you left? And, the question in my mind is, why would Barr do this? Is it that he was, simply a Trump partisan? Or is it?
Well, that's not really the case. I think he's just a Republican.
Yeah, we're taking a break here, Jared. We'll be right back. No, I hit the button. And welcome back. Al in Buffalo, New York, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
Oh, my God, the messages. There are so many secret messages that WikiLeaks actually sent to Roger Stone, okay?
Not to mention the ones that the communication with Don Jr.
Donald Jr., there's another. There's a lot of exchanges. If people Google images of messages sent between Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks, you'll find a whole lot of them. But here's one. Here's one that WikiLeaks sent to Roger Stone. It says, since I was all over national TV, cable, and print defending WikiLeaks and Assange against the claim that you are a Russian agent and debunking the false charges of sexual assault as trumped up BS, you may want to examine the strategy of attacking me. So they had a little bit of a war going on there, because what I'm indicating from this type of a message is that Roger Stone and Donald Trump Jr. went out of their way to help WikiLeaks. Actually, it was Donald Trump Jr. I think that did the dumping, and in conjunction with the fact that it came from the Russian intelligence agency, that lawmakers identified. It was actually Facebook that was forced to identify these fake ads that were connected to the Kremlin-linked Internet Research Institute
Agency.
So,
yeah.
Or agency, but it says institute or agency. But there was the Guccifer 2.0 was not a Romanian. There's a fake ad going all over social media that he was from that he was Romanian, but he wasn't, because Robert Mueller's report and through all the indictments indicated that this Guccifer 2.0 was actually a Russian intelligence officer,
right.
And there was a whole bunch of them, and they were all indicted. And then WikiLeaks responds by saying, well, we appreciate that. However, the false claims of association are being used by the Democrats to undermine the impact of our publications. Don't go there if you don't want us to correct you. Now, you made a very, very good, valid point by saying that, is he a journalism if he's using Russian hacked emails? That's the big question. No, he's not. He's not a journalist if he's using
it's perfectly legal, Al.
It might be perfectly legal, but is it morally right?
Yeah,
no.
Sure. It's journalism. I mean, if a news agency has access to documents that illuminate anything, whether we like it or not, I think that they have an obligation to share those things with the public. That is journalism. What WikiLeaks did that went beyond journalism, and we were talking about this last week, was reaching out to Don Jr. and timing the release of these, both the Clinton emails and the Podesta emails, timing the release to events happening in the campaign. That's not journalism. That is supporting a campaign. That is partisan activity. WikiLeaks was engaging in partisan activity if the emails between Don Jr. and them are to be believed.
Right, I agree. But the whole thing is that the fact that he dumped the emails, that there was a huge dump, and none of the emails showed any wrongdoing by the Clinton administration in those emails.
Right.
It was meant to just give them the...
No, it was just hysteria. It was just churn. It was just chum in the water. Yeah, I got it. Al, thank you. Spot on. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Another thing in the Mueller report, Trump explicitly asked the intelligence officials to clear him of collusion, essentially, and they refused. That's, it's getting weird, right? It's getting very weird, and it is so obvious. I mean, we had this conversation last week about WikiLeaks and Don Jr. and all that kind of stuff. When WikiLeaks began dropping Clinton emails and Podesta emails, by the way, none of which suggested that anybody had committed any crime other than putting their thumb on the scale against Bernie, which you could say is a crime, but it's more of a moral crime than a legal crime. And I would say that it was one of the things that badly hurt the Clinton campaign was, because it disillusioned so many Bernie supporters, which, clearly was the goal of both Trump and the Russians who were supporting Trump. But if you know, when WikiLeaks started doing that, started colluding with the campaign, I mean, that's campaigning. That's beyond journalism. But that's something that we kind of litigated last week. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Of course, the news of the day, the Mueller report. Tom, and I'm for impeachment. At this point, I don't care. Trump is the national security risk that we need to deal with right away. Tom, I just wanted to say with the report, and I want to ask you, being in the field you are, why did we put so much trust in Mueller that he would do the right thing and come to the right, I guess, decision? Because everybody said, wait on the Mueller report. The Democrats said it. Everybody, wait on the Mueller report.
Yeah.
When we got the report, Mueller, for me, was derelict in his responsibility to cause obstruction of justice, because we all know that's what it was or is.
Well, one of the, Pam, if I may, one of the things that I think is a really important point to note is that repeatedly in this document, and I've shared a couple of these excerpts, you know, in my opening rant, but repeatedly in this document, Mueller is saying, we couldn't come to this conclusion because we were lied to. We couldn't come to this conclusion because information was withheld from us. We couldn't come to these conclusions because, you know, information was being communicated over apps that left no traces, and we can't subpoena it. It's out of our reach. So, you know, that raises the question in my mind, was Mueller's investigation shut down by Barr? Keep in mind, one of the things that Barr had said, actually the guy before him, I'm forgetting his name, Keith Davidson was his name, the assistant, the acting attorney general before Mueller. Before he became attorney general, or acting attorney general, he came right out and said that as attorney, if he was made the attorney general, he would cut off the funding to Barr or to Mueller.
Yeah.
And so he comes in as acting AG, and then you know, a few weeks later, Barr becomes AG, and Mueller is suddenly wrapping up his investigation. So it looks to me, I mean, over and over and over again in this document, Mueller's saying, we didn't have all the information we needed to be able to draw these conclusions. That says to me that the investigation wasn't over.
And that's what the Democratic leadership, in their investigation, they should announce. And they should just use plain, simple terms that Trump derailed the investigation, covered it up.
Yep.
And lastly, Tom, let me just ask you this and mention this. Tom, you know, your character and your integrity, your word, right? It's easy to do those things when you're not putting anything on the line. Trump, when he ran, everyone knew what he was and what he wasn't. And I'm upset that President Obama didn't come out and warn the people about Trump, because this is an assault on the Constitution in our country. And not only that, you have Republicans who didn't come out and profess their love for this country.
I really think they didn't believe that Trump could win. I mean, you know, President Obama on a number of occasions did speak of Trump in ways that were, shall we say, negative. But, you know, yeah, I get your point, Pam. And the thing that shocks me is that Mueller has found out that well, I'll pick this up on the other side of the break. Pam, thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That Mueller has found out that Manafort explicitly was giving a Russian oligarch saying focus on Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, "Better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery." On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Minnesota were the states that Paul Manafort specifically told a Russian oligarch, these are the battleground states. And those are the states in which Donald Trump won by the slimmest of margins, because he lost by 3 million votes overall. I mean, are we looking at something even much larger than just, social media posts? Teresa in Panhoa, Hawaii. Am I saying your town right,
it's
Teresa?
Panhoa, Hawaii. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Hey,
you're
what's
close.
up?
You're good.
Okay.
You're good. I was just watching MSNBC where they're reading the report, and then they got one of Trump's lawyers on.
Yeah, Jay Sekulow, I saw that.
Yeah, and then it's like they got it. He said that they got it on Tuesday. I mean, and they had it before it was released to us. I mean,
Right.
Could something be done? Could they have done something to it? I mean, I can't understand.
No, I doubt that.
how
I think the
really?
report is plenty damning as it is. The big thing that jumps out at me over and over and over again in the report is how often that they talk about having been lied to, having had information, corrupt information,
Right.
information being withheld from them, and what that says to me is that Mueller was not finished with his investigation, and I think that that's the shoe that's going to fall. Frankly, is that we're going to learn that Robert Mueller would have been perfectly happy to continue for another year. He wanted to interview Donald Trump, and he says in the report that the only reason that they didn't demand an in-person interview with Donald Trump is because it would have taken too much time. In other words, they knew that he would have fought it and would have gone through the courts and might have gone to the Supreme Court and all that kind of, just like it did with Nixon. And that, and that implies that he didn't have the time to go through that process, which says to me that when I think his name was Keith Davidson. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the guy who was the Attorney General before Barr, the temporary acting guy.
Yeah.
I want to keep wanting to call him Schiller, but that was Trump's bodyguard. But in any case,
Right.
That guy said that if he became Attorney General, he would cut funding to the Mueller investigation, which would stop the investigation. They'd run out of money in a few months. And sure enough, he became Attorney General, acting Attorney General, and suddenly Mueller is wrapping up the investigation. And then Barr comes in and, he shuts the whole thing down. I believe that this thing was stopped prematurely, and Jerry Nadler has now said that he wants Mueller to testify before May 23rd. So it's going to be another month before we've, a month and a week. It's going to be another 5 weeks before we find out. But that would be the first question to Robert Mueller: was your investigation prematurely terminated?
That's another one you could ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at, they investigated Hillary Clinton for 4 years. They investigated Richard Nixon for 3 years. They investigated, Bill Clinton for 7 years. Teresa, thank you for the call. That's spot on. Andy in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Andy, what are you finding that's got your eyeballs popping? Oh, Andy, this happens from time to time. People take you off mute and hit the wrong button. Jesse in Greensboro, North Carolina. Hey, Jesse. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Great show as always. What my eyes really aren't popping. I just kind of figured with the dirt bags we got in Washington right now that this is pretty much going to be the norm. I mean, we're talking about a guy, William Barr, who Oliver North, wasn't he involved with Iran-Contra?
William Barr is the guy who recommended that Ollie North be pardoned. He's the guy who recommended that Elliot Abrams, who's now in charge of destabilizing Venezuela, be pardoned for the crimes of supporting, right-wing death squads in Central America. Yeah, that's William Barr.
And let me kind of go on about this. This shows you just how corrupt. I wouldn't even say it's not the government; it's the people in power that's doing it.
Yes.
Like this whole Mueller report being redacted. The reason why it's redacted, they know it's dirt that's going to implicate. And also, too, let's not take our eye off the other ball, Jared Kushner, right?
Yep.
Well, there was some investigative reporting done. I think TYT talked about this last night, if my memory serves correct, that there's a lot of dirt following him.
Oh,
So, so really, you got to think about it. You're talking about a guy who's white, whose dad is in prison for fraud, probably real estate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it was.
Who's married to the Dunn's daughter, who doesn't know what she's doing, and But the good thing is, Bernie Sanders went on Fox News and pretty much got all the Fox News viewers to realize just how badly they've been duped by this administration.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm hoping that 2020 is an interesting year because I am so sick and tired of folks being lied to.
Yeah, amen.
And also too, I got one more thing to add. At my job, I'm not going to give a name. There was a white guy, who dropped the N-bomb. Now, they pretty much knew how he was when he was there. And I'm like, what took y'all so long to get this guy out the door? Y'all had to wait for a fight to happen for it? So basically what's happening right now, America is starting to wake up to the crap that is in its own backyard, and we need to fix it.
Yeah, amen. Absolutely. Jesse, thank you for the call. By the way, the name of the Attorney General was? Matthew Whitaker. He was the acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, the guy whose name I was blanking on. My apologies for that. And he's the one who had come right out and said, we're going to defund the office of the special counsel. And I'm betting he did. Andy in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First-time caller. You could tell by hanging up.
Oh, it's all good.
Anyway, I'm wondering if I should be encouraged or discouraged about all the redactments. Does that mean that there's a lot more information out there that's, still waiting to be, uncovered, indicted, whatever? Or,
well, one of the things that Mueller says repeatedly in the document is that that they were not able to. Well, I'll read it to you. Okay. The investigation established that several individuals affiliated with the Trump campaign lied to this office, to the special counsel, and to Congress about their interactions with Russian-affiliated individuals in related matters. Those lies materially impaired the investigation of Russian election interference. Now, materially, this is a fancy legal term, but it means, BFD. I mean, this was big time. This actually altered the course of the investigation, all these lies. And that raises the question in my mind of if he was unable to definitely assert that there is or is not a crime, then he's the evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that would need to be resolved if we were making a traditional prosecutorial judgment. At the same time, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and applicable legal standards, we are unable to reach that judgment. That says to me that this investigation was not finished.
Yeah, it seems that way. And just one, there seems like there's four colors, right, for the different types of redacted. I mean, maybe an investigation, or whatever, just looking at what color is most used, and just see what the.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that we're going to get, in the second and third pass through this, as we all start to figure out what's going on. Andy, thank you for the call. A good one. David in Chicago. Hey, David, what's up?
Tom, I love your show. I work during the day, but I always try to catch you, my brother.
Well, thank you. Thank you, David.
Always enjoy it. Listen, from what I heard before I went to work this morning, that there were 10, in the report, it cites 10 different specific things that they could have looked at about obstruction.
Right, where Trump explicitly tried to obstruct justice, yes.
Yes, and it seems to me, just in listening to reports about the report, that this Mueller is almost pleading with the Congress and with Nancy Pelosi, look, this thing is not done. I've given you enough to work with.
Yep.
Go ahead and start impeachment proceedings so that you can get an unredacted copy of this and go forward with this. He's almost pleading with them.
Yeah.
Look, there's not nearly enough to exonerate this president.
Yeah, the obstruction part, this is Section 4 of Part B, or Part C, rather, Russian government outreach and contacts, and it's false statements and obstruction of justice of the investigation, obstruction of the investigation, page 191. George Papadopoulos, one is deleted for personal privacy. What do you want to bet that's Don Jr.? Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen, another deletion for an ongoing investigation. Jeff Sessions and others interviewed during the investigation. But there's, you know, I mean, this is mind-boggling. But the thing that I found most breathtaking, I mean, just breathtaking, is this quote. Manafort briefed Kilimnik. Now, this is the chairman of the Trump campaign briefing a Russian oligarch who is in tight with, you know, Russian intelligence and whatnot. Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. It also included discussion of, quote, battleground, end quote, states, which were Manafort explicitly identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota.
Yeah. It's there.
And those are the states where, yeah, and three of those four are the states where Trump won the election. And, you know, the head of his campaign, who used to work with these guys in Ukraine and whatnot, you know, just, you know, reached out and said, hey, you know, check this thing out. I mean, you know, this is pretty amazing. David, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We got to figure out what's going on here. And you know, step one. Frankly, I think that Jerry Nadler should not only be asking Mr. Mueller to come speak before Congress, but he should be initiating impeachment investigations into Bill Barr as well as Donald Trump. And where's Mike Pence in all this?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, Donald Trump even told the White House lawyer to call Rosenstein and have Mueller removed. I mean, how is that not obstruction of justice? And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, Professor, forgive me, but I'm not impressed with the Mueller report. Once again, I think we got us a false narrative, arbitrary messaging. It kind of reminds me of that Kavanaugh hearing thing when he was trying to be nominated for the Supreme Court. What the Democratic Party needs to do right now is to get a united front, one issue. We're going to bust this guy on income tax evasion. Okay, we are a one-issue party. Let me ask you something, Professor. What does the Bible and Donald Trump's tax returns have in common?
I don't know.
They both tell it all, okay?
I see.
Now, the new leader of the Democratic Party right now is the guy who was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, okay? He's the number one personality of the Democratic Party right now. Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, they got to step down. Bernie Sanders, I'm sorry. This is the guy. This is how you bust the heads of their mafia kind of thing. Sure. You got to take them down on income tax evasion. Everybody is talking about the same thing. We're not competing against each other. We're trying to take this country back. Income tax evasion. We're taking down Al Capone, baby. How do you take down Al Capone? Income tax evasion. Yeah. Thanks for letting me talk.
You're welcome, Morris. And I think that there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, that the Democrats need to basically find one impeachable offense, to figure out one or two things that Donald Trump did and drill down on those as deeply as they can, which is what they did with Bill Clinton. You know, they searched through his past, they searched through his present, they went through all this stuff, and ultimately they found that, you know, Bill Clinton had lied to a grand jury. You know, in testimony that ultimately, I mean, you know, Mueller or Trump refused to give this kind of testimony. Bill Clinton didn't refuse to give that testimony, but he lied during it, and that's what took him down. So, you know, I agree with your sentiment that they need to find, you know, one good solid thing. I'm not sure that one good solid thing is not in this report. In fact, I think that there's multiple things in this report. And, you know, I think this is a huge indictment. But the one concern I have, Morris, about your suggestion that we could do it all on income taxes is like, okay, this is the thing that's going to save us, right? Income taxes, that's going to save us. Earlier, it was the Mueller report. The Mueller report's going to save us. This is called salvationistic thinking. This is endemic and epidemic in our culture, in large part because of our monotheistic religion, principally Christianity, hey, there's this Savior, right? There's an external force. In the case of Christianity, it's Jesus. There's this external force that's going to save us from our evil or from ourselves or whatever. And, the simple reality is that if we're sitting around waiting for the Savior, we're not saving ourselves. We're not doing the hard work that we have to do. We're not doing the investigations. We're not, just like I was always a little wary of waiting for the Mueller report because, I keep saying, and I've been saying it for 2 years on this program, Donald Trump has already committed impeachable offenses. Donald Trump has already been charged with a felony in the indictment of Michael Cohen from the Southern District of New York, Individual 1. He ordered the commission of a felony, campaign finance fraud, for which Michael Cohen's going to prison. So, we've already got an impeachable offense. And I think we need to be driving that road. But to sit around and say, oh, we're going to wait until we get the tax returns, or, oh, we're going to sit around and wait until Mueller's report comes out, I've been saying for 2 years that's a mistake. As soon as we figured out that he had paid off, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, we should have impeached him. That should have been it. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So far, and I have only read about a quarter of the Mueller report, although I'm also, in fact, all of us, me, Sean, Nate, Shear, all of us are and Sue, in fact, Sue tweeted out I believe she tweeted it. She certainly emailed it to us, a searchable copy of the Mueller report, although you've got to sign up for all this stuff if you want to be able to actually search the thing. And it's like, oh, yeah, really? But there will be searchable versions out fairly soon, I'm sure, that you don't have to essentially give away your email address to get. But what we're all finding is, this is intent. This is from the report. Substantial evidence indicates that the president's efforts to have Sessions limit the scope of the special counsel's investigations to future election interference was intended to prevent further investigative scrutiny of the president's and his campaign's conduct. Now, this is titled intent. How is that? As previously described, the president knew that the Russian investigation was focused in part on his campaign, and he perceived allegations of Russian interference to cast doubt on the legitimacy of his election. The president further knew that the investigation had broadened to include his own conduct and whether he had obstructed justice. These investigations would not proceed if the special counsel's jurisdiction was limited to future election interference only. All right, so here, again, the Mueller report pointing out clear obstruction of justice by the president, but they were operating under this Justice Department's finding from two previous presidents who were both subject to the possibility of criminal indictment, that you can't indict a sitting president because he's so busy. He's so busy. He can't play golf. He can't go to his country clubs. He's just so busy that you don't want to mess with him. Anyhow, so what's popping out to you? What are you finding in this report, and what's got your attention? Mark in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Mark, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I agree with everything you're saying there. We need to move forward with impeachment. And with that, in Volume 2, Mueller ends with no one is above the law. And he cites the Nixon and the Clinton and agreeing with your caller, piggybacking that we need to keep pressing this and impeaching, and that Mueller was pleading to us that, hey, this is what we got. I did get shut down. I agree with you there, Tom, and that we need to keep going forward. And if we do impeach, that opens up investigative powers, and then we can dig into maybe election meddling with the voting machines in these states that you're talking about, excellent point, and all those other avenues that it's so broad and it's so obvious that we can all go down.
Yeah. Yeah, amen. And you have to ask the question. I mean, Mueller repeatedly in this document talks about how, you know, they couldn't pursue this path, or they couldn't pursue that path, or they couldn't get Trump to come in and testify because it would take too much time. Well, that suggests that the investigation itself was time limited. If the investigation itself was time limited, who time limited it, right? You know, it was not time limited by Rod Rosenstein when the thing was created. You know, so was it time limited by Matthew Whitaker? Was it time limited by Bill Barr? Was it time limited by the president? I mean, you know, who did this and how and why and under what circumstances? I want to know that. Mark, thank you for the call. Brian in Grant, Michigan. Hey, Brian, thanks for listening to AM 1680. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I think the biggest thing is we need to stop inviting people to testify. I think we need to start, everybody gets a subpoena, everybody's under oath, and we start just impeaching everybody around him, around Trump, I should say.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've got plenty of evidence on a lot of people for misuse of funds and who knows what else, and we just need to start taking it down one piece at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. And I think that an impeachment hearing is a judicial process. And so it gives Congress access to a lot of documents that would otherwise be unavailable to them, whether it's an impeachment of the president or whether it's an impeachment of Bill Barr, the attorney general. And opening an impeachment hearing into Bill Barr, if Jerry Nadler was to do that, I think that would be a very, very powerful weapon that they could use to learn more about what's going on with Trump as well, because Bill Barr has clearly become the toady instrument of Donald Trump. In fact, I saw a cartoon yesterday about Bill Barr handing his report to Trump, and Trump saying, you know, and Barr was, you know, a toad covered with warts, and it was like, don't touch him, he'll get warts. It's like, yeah, he's a total toady.
And, you know, we need to, if somebody refuses to answer questions, say, Mr. Chairman, find this person in contempt of Congress, have the master at arms taken to a cell until they decide that they're willing to answer our questions.
Yep. And if they do it while they're in Congress, there actually is a cell there, and there actually is a sergeant at arms. Outside of Congress, it's kind of hard for Congress to enforce their powers. Spot on. Brian, thank you. Steve in New Boston, Michigan. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom.
Hey, Steve, can you get your mouth closer to your microphone? I can't hear you. Steve, I'm going to put you on hold so that Shira can talk to you about speakerphones. Steve is on line 7, Shira. Ron in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind?
Yeah, a couple of things. How can somebody say definitively there's no collusion or conspiracy when you've got the head of the campaign telling these Russian intelligence people what states to target, A, and B, if, as a report seems to say, that Mueller was having all kinds of obstacles being put in his place, how could he not be sure that those obstacles were so badly inhibiting his ability to discuss whether there was a conspiracy? How do you even know that's the case?
I'm assuming that's a rhetorical question. I mean, what specifically what's the point you're making, Ron?
Well, yeah, I guess it is a rhetorical question to a degree, but I mean, how can you make, with so many obstacles thrown in Mueller's path there, right, how could he be sure of anything?
Well, yeah, and that's the point that he keeps making throughout this thing. But, you know, he was sure of a number of things, and one of them was that the Russians were messing in the election, number one, that Paul Manafort was in tight with them and was handing them campaign information, including be sure to target Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, number two, you know, and number three, that he didn't have time to interview the president, which tells me that his investigation was being shut down. I want to know by whom and under what circumstances.
Excellent.
Yeah, Ron, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. We'll continue our conversation. You know, what is standing out to you in what we're learning so far? Stick around. We'll be right back. It's coming up on the top of the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglas became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglas's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglas was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight, including
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
assistance programs and patient advocacy programs. Handshakes and Feldman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've been talking about the Mueller report and Bill Barr's role in all this. Bill Barr obviously this morning lying to the American people about the meaning, the import, the importance, the principal conclusions of this report. In the report, Robert Mueller comes right out and says, the Department of Justice guidelines, I'm paraphrasing, the Department of Justice guidelines say that we cannot indict a sitting president, so we are not proceeding with basically, here's the indictment. But that said, there's all these areas that need to be looked into. He's basically laying out a path for impeachment for the Judiciary Committee, number one. Number two, well, actually, there's just a bunch of things here that are just mind-boggling, and then I'll be picking up your phone calls on what what is popping your eyes out. What are the things that you're finding that are pretty astonishing? But the special counsel never said that there was no collusion, never. Bill Barr said that 7 times this morning in the press conference this morning. Robert Mueller never said that. One of the things that Mueller did say repeatedly throughout this document is that they were lied to, and that evidence was basically buried, and which well, let me get to that in just a second. The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that would need to be resolved if we were making a traditional prosecutorial judgment. At the same time, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, we are unable to reach that judgment. Now, we already sort of knew that. Well, they didn't exonerate him. Well, they go way beyond that now. But the thing that I can, in fact, one of them, several officials associated with the White House continue to lie about Russia matters. Our investigation was materially impaired by this into the investigation of Russian election interference. And so when you look at this, where he's talking about how we were obstructed, And then you also look at the multiple places in this document, in the Mueller report, where they talk about, we weren't able to finish basically the investigation. We couldn't interview Trump. Why? Because there wasn't enough time. Mueller comes right out and says that. It would have taken too much time. Trump would have fought it. It would have gone through the Supreme Court, all this kind of stuff. It would have taken. Now, they did this with Nixon. Nixon fought it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled against him. And to his credit, Nixon said, okay, here's the tapes. Trump would have done the same thing. And so Mueller's saying, I didn't have enough time. Now, what that causes me to wonder is if the previous Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, the acting Attorney General, who had said in public that the way to shut down the Mueller investigation was to defund it, to take away the money, to kill the budget, and that the Attorney General has the ability to do that. So Whitaker comes in, and suddenly Mueller is starting to wrap the investigation up. And then Barr comes in, and Mueller is definitely wrapping the investigation up. And then in the investigation, repeatedly, or in the report, Mueller says, we didn't have enough time. Well, if you didn't have enough time, who was defining the time limits? Who was saying you may not continue investigating beyond this point? Now, Mueller is not explicitly laying that out in the report. And Jerry Nadler has said, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, which is where impeachments need to originate, has said that he wants Mueller to come testify to him within the next 5 weeks, before May 23rd. And we'll see. But that would be my first question. Who shut down this investigation and how? The investigation of Bill Clinton went on for, 6-7 years? The investigation of Hillary Clinton went on for 4 years? The investigation of Richard Nixon went on for 3 years? I mean, it was early 72, I think, that the Watergate break-in happened. He resigned in 74, in the summer of 74, if my memory is serving me right. And then the other thing that just caused my jaw to drop was this. This is from page 140 of the Mueller report. It's about Paul Manafort. He was the campaign manager. We're in the end days of the election. And he's talking with Konstantin Kilimnik, who is this Russian oligarch. Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. Now, we had heard this before about the polling data, but then it gets mind-boggling. According to Gates, it also included discussion of battleground states, with battleground in quotes, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. So here you have the chairman of the Trump campaign telling a Russian billionaire with close ties to, presumably to Russian intelligence and or at least to whoever is, messing with this election. We could use a little help here in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. What the hell is that all about? So what's getting your attention here? Steve in New Boston, Michigan. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Hey, I was watching CNN the other night, and they had Barr on there, and the question came up about whether he felt that spying was taking place in the campaign. If you could get that back up on the screen and show it to people and watch about 60 seconds before that question was put to him and look at his mannerisms, his eye movements, his vocal, he was fine. When that one came up, his eyes started blinking like he was being electrically shocked.
Right.
And he started stuttering. If that's not a tell of a liar, I don't know what is. That's how I used to catch my kids lying to me when they were growing up.
Yeah, I noticed that, Steve, and my assumption was that Barr, and he kept looking down and looking over to the side, and typically when people are looking down and to the right, they're reviewing an internal conversation, and when they're looking to the side, they're remembering a conversation, or they're remembering somebody else's voice. And I think that Barr and Trump coordinated this, because about the same time that that Barr was testifying that he thought that Trump had been spied on, about that same time, Trump was talking to the press and saying he had been spied on. I mean, it was just shortly thereafter. I think that this was something that they put together. They put it together to derail the narrative. Trump is the master showman. He's a TV reality star. He knows all about changing the narrative. He knows all about defining the narrative points of the storyline, as it were. And I think that what Barr was doing was not so much, fighting with himself about lying, as he was remembering his conversation with Trump, rehearsing in his head what he was going to say to Congress, and then you're right, he came out with it. The other thing in terms of body language that I found fascinating was Rod Rosenstein this morning. He looked like somebody was holding a gun to his back. I mean, he was absolutely rigid. He was unmoving. He was unblinking. He was either completely freaked out or sitting there going, hey, we got them now. I don't know which it was. I really don't know which it was, but it was pretty amazing. Steve, thanks for the call. Haig in Brentwood, Wisconsin. Hey, Haig, what's up?
Hey, morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call, or afternoon.
Sure.
Hey, my question to you is how this relates so closely to what happened with Iran-Contra. We have some of the same players that are on board here.
Yep.
And didn't it just take, or there wasn't a release of classified material that was declassified regarding Iran-Contra within the last couple of years?
Well, what happened was, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, as I recall, Abdolhassan Bani Sadr, who was the president of Iran in 1980, he actually ran for election as president in July, as I recall, of 1980, in the middle of the presidential campaign. And Iran was at that point already holding the hostages. And Bani Sadr ran on a campaign of releasing the hostages, and he won with 79% of the vote. And when you looked at the entire field of people running for the presidency of Iran in 1980, 91% of the vote went to candidates who were in favor of releasing the hostages. So Bani Sadr gets in, and he has said he wants to release the hostages. And this is now, we're talking July, August of 1980. And Jimmy Carter is just starting to tank in the polls really badly because the hostages have been held now for, 10 months, something like that. And he's starting to look ineffective, and he had that failed mission, that failed rescue mission where the helicopter croaked in the desert in the sandstorm. And he came back to the United States. He was living in upstate New York. I'm not sure where he is now. And he wrote an article when the movie Argo came out, which was about the Iran hostage holding. And he wrote an article in which, for the Christian Science Monitor, you can still read it online. Just type in Bani Sadr, BANI-SADR, and Christian Science Monitor, and Iran and hostages into any search engine, and it'll pop right up. And in that article, he says that the mullahs of Iran had cut a deal with the Reagan campaign to hold the hostages. And even though he was elected on a platform of releasing the hostages, he was unable to do that because Iran was already starting to receive spare parts, specifically tires, through Israel from basically Republican sources who wanted Ronald Reagan to win the election. And that's how the election was won. Bani Sadr is on record as having said that. There have been a couple of books written about this. Gary Sick wrote one called October Surprise. Barbara Honegger wrote one called October Surprise. She lays it all out. She puts the blame on William Casey, who was the campaign manager for Reagan. And then Reagan put him in charge of the CIA, and literally the day that he was supposed to testify before Congress about whether he conspired with the Iranian mullahs to flip the election in 1980. Literally that day, Bill Casey had a seizure in his office at the headquarters of the CIA, was taken to the hospital, and they cut out the part of his brain that controls speech. Literally. He died 6 weeks later.
My question is, we're going to probably have to wait 25 years before we hear the whole story about the Mueller report.
Yeah.
And isn't it more beneficial for the progressives, as I like to refer to myself, that we kind of get off this thing and maybe look at New York, Southern District of New York, and move on?
That's happening. I think what we need to move on to is an impeachment hearing. I mean, once the Judiciary Committee files articles of impeachment, Congress is then taking an Article 3 position.
This backfires in our faces in 2020.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. What it does is they don't have to actually impeach him. All they have to do is begin the proceedings. Once they begin the proceedings, they have access to grand jury information that they didn't have access before. They have access to other kinds of information that Congress literally does not have access to, barring an impeachment proceeding. So that's why I think they need to start it. Haig, thanks for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And by the way, the conventional wisdom about how, if you try to impeach Trump, he's going to win the election was based on Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was impeached for sex. This is a completely different thing. And welcome back. Mike in Chehalis, Washington. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
It appears that Barr threw himself on a grenade, but it hasn't gone off yet.
How so?
Along your lines of thinking that Mueller said there wasn't time to interview Trump.
Right.
Possibly, was he tipped off maybe through the pipeline that somebody was coming?
What do you mean?
And he was tipping his hat?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean...
Who's the he you're talking about, Trump or Mueller?
Mueller. Was Mueller...
I'm of the opinion, and I may well be wrong on this. This is pure speculation, but it's based on what Matthew Whitaker said he would do if he became Attorney General, and Trump did make him Attorney General for a while there.
Right.
What he said he would do is he would cut funding to the Mueller investigation, which would cause them to have to wind it up over the next few months. And sure enough, Matthew Whitaker comes in as AG, and 3 months later, the Mueller investigation is toast.
After all, he is a good Republican.
Yeah. Mueller.
So, I mean, for all the glowing reports we've had on Mueller, come on, in his roots, he's a damn Republican.
Well, this is why the Democrats in the House of Representatives, in the Judiciary Committee specifically, need to take responsibility for this. They need to pick this thing up and run with it.
To come forward. I'm tired of Nancy Pelosi sitting on her hands, and we haven't heard a damn thing from Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
This has to go forward.
Well, it starts in the House, so it's okay for Chuck Schumer to hang out on the sidelines for the moment. I get what's going on here, but I'm with you, and frankly, one of the places they could start, if Congress, the Article 2 branch of government, wants to take on some of the roles and thus have some overlap with the Article 3 branch of government, that's the judiciary, and thus have access to grand jury testimony, they don't have to impeach Trump to do that. They can impeach Barr to do that.
Exactly.
So start. Jerry Nadler, start impeachment hearings against Barr.
Can you imagine Barr taking the fifth? Come on.
Yeah. No, I can actually. I can. I mean, of all the people in government who know how to cover up an investigation, Bill Barr's been doing it since 1992.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mike. Good to hear from you. John in Sparks, Nevada. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to point out what's omitted here about Roger Stone.
Yeah.
On page 229, it redacts all of the references to Roger Stone.
Right, because it's an ongoing investigation.
Yeah, and that was stuff that Michael Cohen had testified to in his open hearing, and that he was at the meeting when Roger Stone was on the phone talking to Donald Trump about the upcoming WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the problem here is that, one, we're only going to have half the information because we have ongoing trials such as Roger Stone's. And two, a lot of this was all done through cutouts like Roger Stone, who is not officially in the campaign, and not done by Russian government people. It was done by Kalimnik, who is technically not employed by the Russian government as far as we know.
Correct.
So that's the difficulty here, is trying to connect all the dots when some of these players are on the periphery.
Yeah.
And I think that this report, when I look through it, there's a lot of redactions. There's some pages that are totally blacked out. Yep. And I think that until this is made public, we're never really going to know.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the only way that Congress, or the fastest way that Congress can make that public, is to start an impeachment hearing. Thank you, John. Thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 22 minutes. Coming up on 23 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, all you have to do is go over to ThomHartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just to add to the pot, it's going to get real interesting. I'm guessing this is going to happen later today, but it may happen later in the week as things kind of settle out and shake out, is that both Lanny Davis, who is Michael Cohen's current lawyer and used to be affiliated with the Clinton family, interesting history here. Both Lanny Davis this morning tweeted and Michael Cohen tweeted that Cohen knows what's in a lot of these redacted parts of this report, the Mueller report, and that he's going to jail in a week. He's perfectly willing to come out and tell us all what's in them. This is getting real interesting real fast. But again, let me point out to you this. This is the part that I think should be, on a billboard in Times Square. Manafort briefed Kalimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. It also included discussion of battleground states, which were explicitly identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Really? And, in other places, we didn't have time to finish the investigation, basically. What, you didn't have time? Who put a time limit on it? Was it Matthew Whitaker? Was it Bill Barr? Who put a time limit on the Mueller investigation? Charisse in Poulsbo, Washington. Hey, Charisse, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, Andrea Mitchell mentioned something this morning about Eric Prince meeting with a Russian high up.
Yeah, this famous meeting in the Seychelles. Yeah.
Right. So that's not what I wanted to call about, but I was just thinking about when you said what you said. But with regards to starting impeachment process right now, what about the thing with Trump bailing out China's electrical whatever, and then the Chinese government giving $500 million towards Trump's Indonesian hotel thing, and then Ivanka getting 34 patents or trademarks in advance.
Right.
What about all that stuff that he's doing right now, right out in the open?
Yeah, if this was
aside from this Russia stuff and the hotel and the emoluments clause and all that stuff, what about that stuff? Why don't we just deal with the stuff that's in our face?
Yeah. If Obama had done any of that kind of stuff, I mean, if Obama had even worked out a book deal before he left the White House, the Republicans would have been crawling all over him, screaming impeachment and criminal activity. There are so many things that we can impeach Donald Trump for. The most obvious is that he's actually been charged with ordering Michael Cohen to commit a felony, by the way, for which Michael Cohen is about to go to prison in a week. And I mean, you want to start an impeachment. And by the way, we don't need to start an impeachment with an impeachment of Donald Trump. Jerry Nadler can start impeachment hearings against Bill Barr. And if he were to impeach Bill Barr, now this Article 2 body, Congress, has shifted into Article 3, the judiciary, Article 3, the realm. They've become a judicial body, which is what an impeachment is, and they have access to grand jury testimony. Charisse, thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your thoughts and observations, along with mine, on this whole just absolutely outrageous Barr cover-up of the Mueller report. For our book club today, we're reading from a book by Elizabeth Holtzman, one of the former U.S. congresswomen who sat on the committee that considered impeaching Richard Nixon. And this book is titled The Case for Impeaching Trump. Just came out. This is from the first chapter titled Impeachment. When Donald Trump's presidential election victory was announced in the early morning hours of November 9, 2016, like many Americans, I rubbed my eyes in disbelief and dismay. Two questions raced through my mind. What had become of America that a man so unfit, so small-minded, so mean-spirited could be elected? A man whose ethnic and racial bigotry had set the stage for his presidential run when he called Mexicans rapists and made racist birther attacks on President Barack Obama, whose vulgarity and misogyny were laid bare in the Access Hollywood tape when he bragged about forcibly grabbing women by their genitals, whose performance at presidential debates showed him not only flagrantly ill-informed, but manifestly unwilling to get informed? My second question was about how much harm this man would do to America as its 45th president. I have my answer now to the latter, less than 2 years after the election. President Trump has damaged American democracy far more than I would have guessed. He has refused to protect our system of free elections from foreign interference. He has relentlessly attacked the administration of justice, in particular the investigation into a possible conspiracy with Russia regarding the 2016 presidential election, putting himself above the rule of law. He has failed to separate his personal business from the country's, flaunting the Constitution's requirements. And he has violated the constitutional rights of the people in separating children from parents at the southwest border without due process of law. And to cover up these misdeeds, he has systematically lied to and assailed the press. These are great and dangerous offenses that the framers of our Constitution wanted to counteract and thwart. They provided a powerful remedy: impeachment. Many tremble at the word, fearing how President Trump's supporters will react to an impeachment inquiry, worrying that it will only further polarize an already deeply divided nation, or that there will not be enough votes in the Senate to convict him if the House of Representatives votes to impeach. Just calling for an inquiry will be viewed as a Democratic Party attack on the head of another party, a kind of coup d'etat. It's easy to find reasons to be anxious, but I'm not afraid. As a junior congresswoman, the youngest ever elected at that time, I served on the House Judiciary Committee that voted to impeach President Richard Nixon for the high crimes and misdemeanors he committed in connection with the Watergate cover-up and other matters. Through thorough, fair, and above all bipartisan, the committee acted on solid evidence presented in televised hearings that riveted the nation, handing us the blueprint for how impeachment can be successfully pursued today. In our 225 years of constitutional democracy, the Nixon impeachment process has been proven to be the only presidential effort that worked. Though Nixon resigned, the only president ever to do so, 2 weeks after the committee's impeachment vote, he did so to avoid the certainty of being impeached and removed from office. We became a better nation for having held the president accountable. All of which raises two further questions. Should we be considering the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump? Will we again become a better nation by pursuing that option? To answer, we need to set aside President Trump's unremitting attacks on the environment, on our close allies, on the Affordable Care Act, and any disagreements we have over policy, as well as any personal animus, and simply ascertain whether he has engaged in the kind of egregious conduct that would meet the constitutional standards for impeachment and removal from office. This means we have to focus sharply on his potentially impeachable offenses. In doing so, we will find it useful to compare them, when possible, to similar offenses by President Nixon, found to be impeachable by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974. Here's a list of some of President Trump's potentially impeachable offenses developed as of this writing. A possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. On May 9, 2017, Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who was investigating both his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and Russia's connections to the Trump campaign in connection with influencing the 2016 presidential election. 2 days later, President Trump admitted to NBC's Lester Holt that Comey's firing had to do with that, quote, Russia thing. In other words, President Trump acknowledged that he was trying to shut down the FBI investigation into his own possible conspiracy with Russia. Flynn has since pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The Comey firing uncannily echoes Nixon's firing of the special Watergate prosecutor for seeking highly damaging information about that president, a brazen defiance of the rule of law that triggered the start of impeachment proceedings against Nixon. A second possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. President Trump has persistently and publicly attacked those heading the Russia investigation, including Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and has repeatedly condemned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself, suggesting that he wants to fire any and all of them in order to get control of the Russian investigation. He actually did give an order to fire Mueller. A failure to care that the laws are faithfully executed is required by the Constitution. To try to deflect public concern about his possible role, well, it continues from there. The case for impeaching Trump by Elizabeth Holtzman.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is fascinating. This is from page 7 of the Mueller report. They're talking about a guy by the name of Dmitriev, Kirill Dmitriev. He was the chief executive officer of Russia's sovereign wealth fund. They say he was among the Russians who tried to make contact with the incoming administration in early December. Now, this was after the election. Trump is now president. He hasn't been sworn into office yet. In early December, a business associate steered Dmitriev to Eric Prince, a supporter of the Trump campaign and an associate of senior Trump advisor Steve Bannon. Dmitriev and Prince later met face-to-face in January 2017 in the Seychelles and discussed U.S.-Russian relations. During the same period, another business associate introduced Dmitriev to a friend of Jared Kushner, who had not served on the campaign or the transition team. Dmitriev and Kushner's friend collaborated on a short written reconciliation plan for the United States and Russia, which Dmitriev implied had been cleared through Putin. The friend gave that proposal to Kushner before the inauguration, and Kushner later gave copies to Bannon and incoming Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. You know, that may not be as damning as actually as I thought it might be on first read, because, you know, Trump basically campaigned on trying to clean up relations with Russia. And frankly, I think a lot of us think it would be a good thing if the United States could have a good relationship with Russia. But, you know, it's there are some problems, and some of those problems include the behavior of the Russian government. But in any case, I think the big take home in my mind there's a couple of things here that I see as major points. Number one, Mueller repeatedly talking about he was running out of time. Well, who put the time limit on the investigation? Number two, Manafort briefing Konstantin Kilimnik that they needed help in battleground states, including, quote, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, end quote. This is a quote from the Mueller report. And that Manafort had given Kilimnik the messaging and internal polling data on this thing. It's amazing stuff. Christine in Beaverton, Oregon. Hey, Christine, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Nice to talk with you this morning.
Thank you.
I'm looking at page 392 of the Mueller report.
Okay.
I've skimmed through it pretty quickly, and this to me is the most damning part of the whole thing that I've skimmed through so far. And if I can read it out loud. In any event, probing the president's intent in a criminal matter is unquestionably constitutional in at least one context. The offense of bribery turns on the corrupt intent to receive a thing of value in return for being influenced in official action. There can be no serious argument against the president's potential criminal liability for bribery offenses, withstanding the need to ascertain his purpose and intent. I think we have to absolutely follow up with his taxes, with the Deutsche Bank accounts, but also something that we have not heard a lot of in the news lately, money that was funneled through the NRA.
Right.
The NRA officials went to Russia. Most of the Republicans have received millions of dollars from the NRA. President Trump got $30 million through the NRA. How much of that was being funneled through Russian LLCs or whatever way they funneled that into the NRA? That has to be researched much more in depth.
Yeah, I agree. It's a fascinating question, and there's a bunch of fascinating questions. What page did you say that was on that you were reading?
page 392.
392. Okay, let me get to that page. Here we go. Which is also numbered as page 180 in the document. Is that correct?
Oh.
Part 2 of the document? Does it say 180 at the bottom of the page?
I'm not sure.
These considerations distinguish the Supreme Court's holding in Nixon v. Fitzgerald at the very top of the page.
Let's see. Let me get the
Yeah, in any event, probing the president's intent in a criminal
yes.
matter is unquestionably constitutional in at least one context. Wow.
There can be no serious argument against his criminal liability for bribery.
Right.
That's damning right there.
Yeah, it really is.
Whether we talk about collusion and all the complexities around that, bribery, impeach him for criminal bribery, get the information from Deutsche Bank, from his tax returns, wherever, and start impeachment right away so that.
But see, I don't think that the crime that he was committing that Deutsche Bank would be able to testify to was bribery. I think that was money laundering. Now, you know, maybe Mueller mentions money laundering in here someplace. In fact, I can search for that phrase.
Yes, I'm sure that will reveal that as well. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah. I'm getting hit money laundering on page 70 here. See, this is the thing, you know, it just takes so much time to go through the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll continue. We'll continue with this conversation. Christine, thank you very much. Appreciate the call. That was fascinating. Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
You know me, Tom. I hate the weeds. I'm going to get out of the weeds for just a second.
Sure.
What are we talking about here? The crime wasn't collusion.
Collusion's not a crime. Collusion is a word.
Right. The crime, the biggest crime facing us, all of us, is election theft.
Yes.
We've got to start using that term. So much of this is messaging and language, Tom.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
This was election theft by domestic criminals with an assist from Russia. Let's start talking clearly. These guys went up there this morning, shot their cuffs, tightened their ties, and says, we're going to tell them what's what. No. I say let's apply the RICO Act to election theft.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you, Zach, and I'll start. Thank you for that reminder. I will calibrate my language. Thanks, Zach. Gene in Roseburg, Oregon. Hey, Gene, what's up? Gene, you're on the air? Okay, no Gene. Let's try Richard in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
Hey, when you were talking earlier about Manafort, you know, talking to the people in Russia, plug nickel from any of those people. I mean, that in itself, as far as I know, is illegal. And if we look at the big picture of the whole darn thing, I mean, it's almost like a worldwide crime organization amongst oligarchs that are you know, they're doing irreparable damage to every level of living for all of us, and how we can put things together to not only take care of this problem in our country, but the oligarchs in this fascist movement around the world. Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you guys, and it's so obvious the crimes that are going on, and 50 years of.
And let's not, by the way, forget that Trump himself is an oligarch if he's actually as rich as he says he is.
And we need to follow the money, every penny that's gone everywhere, and start putting these out Guantanamo Bay and start throwing these guys in it.
Well, I think that we should shut down Gitmo, but I get your point, Richard. I absolutely get your point. And this is just like there was so much straightforward stuff. The investigation established that several individuals affiliated with the Trump campaign lied to our office and to Congress about their interactions with the Russian-affiliated individuals and related matters. Those lies materially impaired the investigation of Russian election interference. This is, as Zach pointed out, election theft. That's what we're talking about here. Steve in Topanga, California. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, well, I was just thinking that the real prize is the election in 2020. That's the soonest way we can get back to normalcy.
Well, unless the real prize of the election in 2020 is the thing that the oligarchs who rigged the last election. I mean, you've got oligarchs like the ones who were supporting Steve Bannon and paying for, domestic oligarchs, the Mercers and people like that, and Shelley Adelson and whatnot, who were funding the Trump campaign in a big way to do like deep dives, through Cambridge Analytica and whatnot, and very, very targeted messaging. And then, Kilimnik and, Russian oligarchs, presumably there were Saudi oligarchs or Israeli oligarchs. I mean, there may well have been people from numerous countries involved in this thing in basically rigging our election for Donald Trump, the oligarch.
Well, here's the deal. Half the people that are eligible to vote in this country don't. And if the Democrats can get a good message to bring those people that don't vote.
No, but my point is, if they stole the last election, how are we going to stop them from stealing the next?
By getting more people involved.
Okay, it's the old, if they're going to steal 6 million votes, we need to turn out 10 million votes.
Well, it was really close in those 4 states you said that won the election for him. Hillary got the popular vote.
Yeah.
And he only won by a little bit in those states. So if we just had a little bit more pull, the Democrats, in those 4 states, it would have gone the other way.
Right, or at least 3 of those 4 states. Yeah, I don't think he carried Minnesota, but...
Well, and the other point is if we go down the impeachment, which I think we should do, it's going to take time. A faster way to get things back in control is to win the election in 2020 with the Democrats or whoever, anybody but Trump, basically.
Yeah.
It's just, but I do think that your focus on trying to pick 1 or 2 things to focus on in impeachment and go there is a smart strategy. If you spray it out too much, you're going to lose the interest.
I think you can build a case that if the American public had known in the week after the Access Hollywood tape dropped that Trump had paid $150,000 or whatever it was, $130,000 to shut up 2 previous mistresses, one from an affair that was a year long, in the year after his youngest son was born, that, probably he wouldn't have gotten those 80,000 votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. The 3 states, by the way, that they explicitly reached out to Russia and said we need some help with. Steve, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
In other words, with or without Russia, which is the core of the Mueller investigation, with or without Russia, what we see is that Trump rigged the election by hiding that information. And welcome back. Dean in Silver Springs, Florida. Hey, Dean, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've got a little different take on Barr, and I'd kind of like to know what you think about it. It seems to me if you watch carefully all of the hearings and everything else that he's been through, he pretty much says what Trump wants to hear. But at the same time, when certain questions are asked to him, he provides almost a roadmap of how to get around the stuff that he's doing. He's a lawyer. He's not.
Give me an example.
Man. Well, I wish I could, but there's so many of them. And
I can't think of a single example like that, Dean. I can think of where Mueller did that. Mueller saying, that there is a constitutional basis for prosecuting a president.
Right.
Mueller said a bunch of things. Basically, Mueller gave Jerry Nadler a roadmap for indicting and impeaching Donald Trump. But Bill Barr has been lying from day one. He lied before Congress in his confirmation hearings.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And I mean, we're looking at basically pond scum here from the top down. But when you take into account that this man was supposedly retiring to enjoy the rest of his career, and then he provides an unsolicited letter that is going to impeach Trump's interests, and he needs an attorney general. Anyway, he gets the job.
Yeah.
And then to me, there's just little snippets in there that make me wonder. It's like he's either an enigma or something.
The question in my mind, Dean, is why did Bill Barr do this? Why did Bill Barr ruin his own reputation for Donald Trump? And the guy's 68 years old. I mean, he's pushing 70. He's Social Security age. He doesn't need to be doing this. And he was last year at the law firm he was working at, he made $1.2 million. plus he got a nice golden parachute when he left. And I'm wondering, did one of the billionaire oligarchs who are funding the Trump campaign reach out to Bill Barr and say, hey, if you can do for Trump what you did for George Bush and Ronald Reagan back in '92, we'll make sure that, the first year after you're no longer Attorney General, you're pulling down $10 million, as corporate counsel to one of my corporations.
Okay.
Why did Barr do this, right? What did he do it for money? Did he do it for love of Donald Trump? That seems bizarre to me, love of Donald Trump.
Suppose that Barr really is somewhat of a patriot, and he looks at Trump and goes, holy cow, how did this guy ever get in? He's really, really not suited to the job, and he's
if that was the case, he wouldn't have said 7 times today, no collusion. That phrase, no collusion, when in fact the word collusion doesn't even exist in this document.
I know that. I understand all that. But the point is that he is saying stuff that Trump wants to hear and giving them stuff that really doesn't mean anything to jump out on airwaves and say, oh, no collusion, no this, no that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he provides these tiny little snippets. If you watch everything closely, you'll go, wait a minute, what does he mean by that?
Yeah, I am reading from the Barr report. I just Control-F'd on the word collusion here. As an initial matter, this office evaluated potentially criminal conduct that involved the collective action of multiple individuals, not under the rubric of collusion, but through the lens of conspiracy law. Collusion is not a specific offense or theory of liability found in U.S. Code, nor is it a term of art in federal criminal law. In other words, the report itself says collusion is not a crime. Why is it that Bill Barr 7 times this morning said, see, this report shows there's no collusion? Dean, thanks for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. On the line with us is former Ohio Congressman Bob Ney, the author of Sideswiped. He's a reporter with Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. And we will continue our conversation, by the way, with you, our listeners, our viewers, whatnot, after the top of the hour as we go into our third hour and continue our conversation about, what are the things in this report that are making your eyes bug out. The ones that made my eyes bug out, Bob, and welcome to the program. The particular quote that just, really shocked me was Manafort briefed Kalimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. According to Gates, it also included a discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Really?
Right.
What does that say to you, Bob? You're a former member of Congress.
Well, it means that they have a target.
Yeah.
They targeted it.
Yeah, it sure seems that way. I mean, three of the 4 states in which Trump won by, less than 20,000 votes in each one of the states, in states that not only had engaged in massive voter purges of hundreds of thousands of voters in every single one of the states, but also you had, in Michigan, you had some 80,000 people who didn't, who voted for everything except I'm wondering if our election systems were compromised. But anyhow, what's on your mind today, Bob?
I mean that's the section. I haven't gotten through all this because I've been on air, but I think that specific area, and I did start to read through the obstruction of justice issues and the responses, which I don't recall, I don't remember, I don't recall, et cetera, through there. But Barr, I think there is an issue on the redaction that if it's pushed, I'm not sure that the Democratic side wins on it. If Mueller, in fact, says, yes, everything was redacted accordingly, then there can be lawsuits, don't get me wrong, Tom, to see, right, what else is in there, or let at least the chair of the Intel Committee and the ranking member see what's in there. I'm just not sure that that is the best part of this to really. I
don't think we need a whole lot more. I mean, Donald Trump, according to McGahn, when Trump was told that the that the special prosecutor was, going after the collusion between his campaign and Russia, Trump was like, I'm effed. He was like, that's the end of my presidency.
The end of his presidency. And so that's what I said, it's sort of the mechanics of it, a couple of things. One.
That's an admission of guilt, isn't it, Bob?
Well, I think it's pretty well, in my opinion, it is. If you are sitting there, I mean, I've been down this path, and when my whole trials and tribulations started, the thing I said is, this is ridiculous, I will fight this. I didn't say, I'm done, oh my goodness, I'm finished, because in my mind, I wasn't. Mm-hmm. If in his mind he was finished, then I would assume that he would think that he had all kinds of legal problems and all kinds of legal issues that were going to be uncovered, thoroughly.
Yeah.
To think that from day one when something's announced like that.
Yeah, it just screams consciousness of guilt.
Right, and that's why I said, as far as getting hung up on seeing the rest of the redacted material, by the 23rd of May, Mueller has to come in. Chairman Nadler of the Judiciary Committee, Tom, as you know, has said come in. That is the jackpot, in my opinion, right there, because that's the point in time you ask a ton of questions, including, why did you not indict? You couldn't indict because he's the president. Right. I mean, this starts to lay out there.
Well, the other question to me is, in several places in this document, Mueller talks about how, pulling Trump in for an interview would have taken too much time. We didn't have enough time to follow through on this. Blah blah blah. Well, who set the time limit? Was it Barr? Was it Whitaker? I mean, who? We know it wasn't Rosenstein. I mean, who set the time limit? And Whitaker campaigned for the job of Attorney General, which he got, acting Attorney General for a while, campaigned for that on saying in public that if he was the Attorney General, he'd cut off funding to the Mueller investigation. He becomes Attorney General, and suddenly the Mueller investigation starts wrapping up their business. And now they're saying, well, if we just had a little more time, well, who could, so that would be my first question. And by the way, Sean tells me that Jerry Nadler has set the hearing for May 2nd, where Mueller, I'm sorry, say that again? For Barr. Oh, I thought it was Mueller. Okay.
And then by May 23rd would be Mueller. By May 23rd
is Mueller. Okay, got it.
There's another question, for example, Tom. What are the non-publicly reported actions by Trump and Barr that they refer to that would constitute obstruction of justice? There's mention of non-publicly reported actions. What are they there? Do they exist?
Right.
And also, did Mueller intend for obstruction of justice to be decided by Congress now? Or is this a matter of the Justice Department? And I don't know why everybody is kind of shocked about Barr. Look, Barr entered this day one, I think, at least in trying to analyze this whole thing. He entered day one knowing what he was going to do.
Right.
Knowing what he was going to do. And I can't figure out, he's had a career that's been fascinating, what the pool was, unless he was obviously, promised something or feels that the President of the United States would owe him one.
Yeah. Well, this would be my first question for Jerry Nadler when he's interviewing Barr on May 2nd, which would be, did any of the billionaire buddies of Donald Trump tell you that you had any sort of a job or any sort of a board position or anything that might compensate you very, very, generously if you were successful in basically spinning this whole thing in a way that just preserved Trump's presidency so we could get another tax break or whatever.
And I think for the campaign purposes, they need to be asked, why did Paul Manafort, he shared polling data with a suspected Russian intelligence operative, right? Why did he share the polling data?
Well, not just polling data. The next sentence says it included discussion of battleground states, which were Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota.
Right.
It's like,
you know what that tells us?
Yeah, put a bullseye here.
Well, sure, of course. Why would you share data? It's coordination. And I also noticed collusion, and then they got into the terms of not using coordination under federal law.
Huh. Amazing. Yep. Amazing. We live in an amazing moment here, Bob. We really do. Bob Ney would talk. Say that again?
Yet to be seen, to be played out.
Yeah, stay tuned to this channel. Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Thank you, Bob. It's always good talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. For the Thom Hartmann Book Club, our book today is How Wealth Rules the World, Saving Our Communities and Freedoms from the Dictatorship of Property by Ben G. Price, with a blurb on the back from some guy named Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction, One Right to Rule Them All, The Dark Side of Property. Let's get it out in the open. The United States of America, nations that emulate its governing principles, are governed by a dictatorship of property. Is that plutocracy? Sure, but it goes deeper than that. The U.S. Constitution, as it was written and later interpreted by the Supreme Court, hijacked democratic rights that American revolutionaries thought they had won. The Federalists developed a whole system of law that serves the interests of wealth. Elements of that system include the following: state constitutions untethered from their revolutionary moorings, international trade agreements that supersede local, state, and federal laws, regulations administered by an unrepresentative bureaucracy, political parties that gerrymander legislative districts so that they can choose their voters rather than allowing voters to choose their representatives, corporate property that the Supreme Court has declared to be persons with Bill of Rights protections, federal and state statutes that privatize public governance and prohibit democratic limits on the uses of private fortunes, and local governments declared to be property of the state and made unavailable to communities for municipal lawmaking. We live deep within an undemocratic matrix of law that masquerades as a democratic republic while it legalizes an aristocracy of wealth. The U.S. Constitution was written by men who came from a uniformly privileged class. Charles Beard argued this point in his book, An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. Beard analyzed the economic interests of those who met in secret to overturn the Articles of Confederation and concluded that the Federalists were motivated by economic self-interest to establish a form of government that would protect their wealth against an excess of democracy, as Alexander Hamilton put it. The Federalists who replaced the Articles with the U.S. Constitution were not fully aligned with the liberating agenda of commoners who risked their lives to throw off the hierarchical chains of Great Britain. They were wealthy men educated in British law with opinions that harmonized with aristocratic sentiments. The authors of the U.S. Constitution are often called the Founding Fathers. Popular history lumps the Federalist counter-revolutionaries in with the likes of Thomas Paine, who with his firebrand writings against monarchy, nobility, and special privilege for the few, inspired the people to demand independence. Popular culture counts the Federalists as American revolutionaries no less fervent for liberty than the men whose ideas of leveling the social class system inspired American farmers and day laborers to pick up their muskets and take on the redcoats. This conflation of the Federalist counter-revolutionaries with those whose spirit of '76 is reflected in the Declaration of Independence and absent from the U.S. Constitution is a troubling reminder that popular history too often preserves false memories. What's the evidence that the Federalists intended a Constitution that weaponizes law to protect the accumulation of property and raise wealth and out of reach of public governance? Well, to begin with, their own words were recorded in Philadelphia in 1787 by James Madison and Robert Yates. Damningly, that record was held secret until every delegate to the clandestine conclave had died and the Constitution they wrote had been the law of the land for 2 generations. We have that evidence, and it tells the tale I'll share in Chapter 2. We also have the product of their cleverness to consider. The Federalists established a quasi-monarchical judiciary. Politically appointed judges wielded the power to veto any legislation that departs from the Federalists' original intent, to protect wealthy accumulation from democratic oversight. We have the arguments of the anti-Federalists who called out the would-be American aristocrats for betraying the revolution. If not for them, we would not have the first 10 amendments to the Federalist document, the Bill of Rights, which many identify as the soul of the U.S. Constitution. More immediate evidence that the original intent of the U.S. Constitution was to immunize possession of unearned property from public regulation can be found in the antisocial way the document is interpreted by the courts and how it operates on society today. Here's my argument in a nutshell. We are faced with social, political, and environmental problems that resist resolution because law empowers a wealthy minority to govern based on priorities often at odds with the general welfare. The Constitution and its interpretation by the courts amounts to an arsenal of weaponized law able to deliver special privileges to a propertied class. Certain legal mechanisms let those seeking to profit at the public expense block policies that compete with their interests. These legal doctrines operate by a two-step process. First, they remove democratic rights from the public sphere and deposit them in concentrated accumulations of property. The oddity of attaching legal rights to property itself rather than to people roared into public consciousness with the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United ruling that affirmed corporate property's personhood and free speech rights. Although the ruling shocked the conscience of average Americans, it was not the first time the court had vested civil rights within inert property. Nor were corporations the first type of property to be given legal rights. The second step is for property imbued with rights to deliver those rights as an extra layer of legal privilege to the property owner. When civil and human rights are deposited in property, that property is placed beyond the authority of the people to govern how it is used by its owner. This nullifies the majority's ability to decide directly or through elected representatives what public policy will be. As a result, we aren't allowed to resolve issues of immediate concern to every community. Even when we understand what needs to be done, we're often blocked. And then he goes through the whole list. Benji Price wrote, How Wealth Rules the World.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
In the case of the ACLU, even a agenda. Legal groups on the right tracked the Republican platform. More. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is pretty amazing stuff. This is from the Mueller report, and it's about Senator Richard Burr. He's a Republican from what, North Carolina, as I recall, and no, he's from someplace else. I'll figure it out as we're going on. But on March 9th, 2017, Comey briefed the Gang of 8 congressional leaders, and Burr is one of them, about the FBI's investigation of Russian interference, including an identification of the principal U.S. subjects of the investigation. Although it is unclear whether the president knew of that briefing at the time, notes taken by Annie Donaldson, then McGahn's chief of staff, state, quote, POTUS in panic/chaos. Need binders to put in front of POTUS. All things related to Russia, end quote. The week after Comey's briefing, the White House counsel's office was in contact with SSCI Chairman Senator Richard Burr about the Russia investigations and appears to have received information about the status of the FBI investigation. So the FBI is conducting an investigation into the White House, and they brief the Senate as part of oversight. They brief the Gang of 8, and one of those senators, Richard Burr, leaks that information to Trump himself or to the Trump White House. This is breathtaking. And then we've got this, according to Barr's summary. These are Michael Cohen tweets out. Contrary to Barr's summary, this makes clear that Mueller's team took into account and made their determinations based on the fact that a sitting president can't be indicted. I already made that point. In fact, Mueller makes that point repeatedly. So, if you, in any case, and then continuing, Daniel Dale is tweeting about this. He says, this is from the Mueller report. After Flynn withdrew from his defense agreement with Trump, Trump's lawyers left Flynn's lawyer a voicemail demanding a heads up if Flynn was giving Mueller any information that, quote, implicates the president, and asking Flynn to remember that Trump had warm feelings for him. Don Jr.'s draft statement about the Tower meeting was more honest, but then after his dad got involved to direct the response, it became a dishonest assertion that the meeting was about adoption. Trump Jr. then added the word primarily to soften his dad's claim. So, and then Trump said, when he learned that the Mueller investigation was rolling out, he said, oh, my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I am effed. And this was right after learning that the special counsel had been appointed. This is according to Don McGahn. I mean, this stuff is coming out. We've got the, there's a bunch of take-home points here. The special counsel did not say that there was no collusion. In fact, there's some specific language about collusion in the Mueller report. It says, as an initial matter, this office evaluated potentially criminal conduct that involved the collective action of multiple individuals, not under the rubric of collusion, but through the lens of conspiracy law. Right? In other words, we're not making any decisions about collusion. Well, they go on to say, in doing so, the office recognized that the word collude appears in the acting attorney general's memorandum. It has frequently been invoked in public reporting, and it is sometimes referenced in antitrust law. But collusion is not a specific offense or theory of liability found in U.S. code, nor is it a term of art in federal criminal law. To the contrary, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, and they go on from there. But basically, collusion is not a legal term outside of a subset of antitrust law. And so we're not looking at collusion. Then why did Bill Barr 7 times in his little press conference this morning say, oh, no collusion? Why is Trump running around saying no collusion when the Mueller report is specifically saying, we didn't even look at collusion, right? That's not, you don't look at something that's not against the law. What we were looking at was criminal conspiracies. They go on to say, by the way, that the president can be prosecuted. It's largely up to the attorney general. This is from page 180. In the rare cases in which a substantial and credible basis justifies conducting an investigation of the president, the process of examining his motivations to determine whether he acted for a corrupt purpose need not have a chilling effect. Ascertaining the president's motivations would turn on any explanation he provided to justify his actions, the advice he received, the circumstances surrounding the actions, and the regularity or irregularity of the process he employed to make decisions. But grand juries don't have automatic access to confidential presidential communications on these matters. In other words, we couldn't get this information. In any case, probing the president's intent in a criminal matter is unquestionably constitutional. At least one context, the offense of bribery turns on the corrupt intent to receive a thing of value in return for being influenced in official action. Now, I wonder if what he's saying here is, those Saudis who came and stayed in the president's hotel and dropped hundreds of thousands of dollars, or people who gave millions of dollars to the Trump inaugural? If Trump gave them some benefit from that, that is bribery. That's interesting. And so, number one, no such thing as no collusion, even though Barr asserted, Barr has just gone all in, right? He's now repeating, he's parroting Donald Trump and they were spying on me, wild conspiracy theory. He has said that there was no obstruction when the Mueller report, and he asserted that Mueller was, or implied that Mueller was saying there was no obstruction, when in fact there's obstruction all through this report. Mueller's quite explicit about it. Barr repeatedly said attempts of Russians to collude, attempts of Russians, efforts of Russia. He never came out and actually said that there was actual interference in our elections, which should trouble us all. And by the way, I think this needs to be expanded beyond Russia. I want to know what the Saudis were doing, what the Israelis were doing, what the Chinese were doing. I doubt the North Koreans were in the act at that time, but what's the deal here? The evidence, this just goes on and on. Several officials associated with the White House continue to lie about Russia matters. Our investigation was materially impaired by these lies, essentially. And then, this shocker. Manafort briefed Klimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. According to Gates, it also included a discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. What a coincidence. So, your thoughts on all this. Larry in Arp, Texas, it says here you want to argue with me. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope for the next 2 years you guys keep investigating this. It's only going to make Trump look better. For
Really?
2 years, you guys.
It looks better that he's reaching out to a foreign power to get elected? How does that make him look good?
For 2 years, you guys put your faith in Mueller.
How does it make Trump look good that he is reaching out to a foreign power to help himself get elected? How does that possibly look good for him, Larry?
Because the report shows he did it.
No, the Mueller report shows that not only did he do this, Don Jr. said, "I love it." Right? You had Don Jr. talking to WikiLeaks about coordinating the drop of emails that were stolen by Russian intelligence, about coordinating the drop of those with the campaign, with the same day. In fact, this is from the Mueller report, right? On October 7th, 2016, the media released video of candidate Trump speaking in graphic terms about women years earlier, which was considered damaging to his candidacy. Less than an hour later, WikiLeaks made its second release, thousands of Podesta's emails that had been stolen by the GRU in late March 2016. How does that make the president look good?
Because just because you say I love it doesn't mean you're taking the evidence.
That's not I love it. That is we are collaborating with you. Larry, I'm sorry. You can be all, grins and happy about this. We're talking about the corruption of an election for President of the United States. We're talking about a man in the White House who is visibly criminal, who conspired with Michael Cohen, with a Playboy bunny, and with a porn star to suppress their testimony in order to get himself elected. That in and of itself is more than impeachable. That's enough. And the Southern District of New York has already essentially called him out on it. It's part of the charging documents against Cohen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. Stick around at 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, Adam in New Orleans. Hey, Adam, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
How you doing, Tom? As progressive, I'm becoming increasingly frustrated with establishment Democrats' reticence to impeach. Mueller's report could provide clear evidence of obstruction, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, and the Democrats still would not impeach, I'm convinced.
Well, we don't know that yet, Adam.
Well, no. I mean, we know what Pelosi's position is.
What Pelosi's position was wait for the Mueller report. Well, the Mueller report dropped today. Let's give it a day or two to settle in before we start criticizing Pelosi.
But we've had 2 years of evidence, and it's like, oh, we're waiting for this.
Right.
I mean, let's face it. Trump and the GOP have made people ungodly fortunes now.
Yeah.
And these people do not want to give that back. And I'm afraid that is what's behind all of these decisions. So I hope you're right.
The logic goes, Bill Clinton was impeached for lying about a BJ, and therefore if you try to, and he became more popular at the end of that. And in fact, if he had gone out, if Al Gore had allowed him to campaign for Al Gore would have easily won. And therefore, if we try to impeach Trump, it'll just make him more popular with people. And the popular with people that they're talking about was not the Democratic base in the case of Clinton, and it's not the Republican base in the case of Trump. They're talking about the quote undecided voters, the so-called middle, the swing voters. And the swing voters, I think, were, just like all the rest of us, horrified that the details of Bill Clinton's sex life were being dragged through the press, and this 22-year-old young woman was being just absolutely trashed and vilified and all kinds of things. Ken Starr's report was pornographic. All that grand jury material was released, unlike today. And I think that the average kind of low information voter was going, they're going after Clinton for something that literally more than half of married men and slightly less than half of married women have done, which is have an affair, right? They're going after Clinton for this. And that's something that, that's a standard we don't want to establish, right? Especially given the fact that it's as common, that kind of behavior is as common as it is. If you go after Donald Trump for conspiring with a foreign country, for taking money from the Saudis, for Kushner getting $1 billion from the buddies of the Saudis, for blackmailing the Qataris to get Kushner's $1 billion. If you go after Donald Trump for all the lies that he has told, literally thousands and thousands of lies. If you go after Donald Trump for rigging an election essentially by suppressing the testimony of the women that he was having affairs with, literally the week after it came out that he was recorded saying that he loves to just grab women, by the private parts. If you go after Trump with that stuff, I think the swing voters are going to go, that guy's a cretin. What's he doing in the White House? Which is what the Republicans thought people would say about Bill Clinton.
What I would ask, Tom, is that if over the next month or two, we start seeing, the Democrats digging in their heels, saying we're still not going to impeach because the perfect evidence has not shown up. Even if it has, I would ask that you take it out.
Yeah, I will be raising hell, Adam. I absolutely will be raising hell. Adam, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls and thoughts on, what's going on here. And, discussions and debates if you'd like. Right after this, it's coming up on it's 20 minutes past the hour. We put together the coolest little newsletter every single day or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot. The word out. Just check. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I think this is perhaps the most interesting thing that I've found so far. And keep in mind, we're just a few hours into the Mueller report. Is this reference to a discussion that Paul Manafort, when he was the campaign manager of the Trump campaign, had with a Russian oligarch who is reputed to have ties to Russian intelligence, in which, quote, it was also discussed, it also included discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. And Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, in those three states, Trump won by 10, 20,000 votes? And he lost to Minnesota. I mean, what's with that? Mary in Minneapolis. Hey, Mary, any thoughts on this?
Yes, I have some definite thoughts. Minnesota has paper ballots, first of all, and they have same-day voter registration. And those two things contribute to our usual highest voter participation in the nation for elections. And I think that that's what prevented Trump and his strategy from being able to win Minnesota.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Thank you, Mary. That's, another mind-boggling thing. Lewis in Milwaukee, it says here you want to argue with me?
Well, yeah, but well, let's start out with, I've talked to you before. I don't like Trump. I'll never like Trump. Okay, let's keep that straight.
It doesn't matter whether you like Trump or not, Lewis.
No, it really doesn't. That's part of the point. Thank you. We've known Hillary Clinton for at least 36 years. You have, I have, a majority.
Yeah, we're not going to relitigate that, Lewis. There's no point in it. If you want to talk about the Mueller report, go for it.
Exactly. That's going on to it. The fact of the matter is, both you and I knew who we were going to vote for, and Russians be damned. They couldn't do anything to change our minds. We knew Hillary. I knew I didn't like her.
Maybe that's true of you, Lewis, and maybe that's true of me, but I don't think that that's true of the literally hundreds of thousands of people in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania who were targeted with ads on Facebook.
No, she's a known commodity. We knew about
who
her
were targeted with ads on Facebook by this Russian troll farm.
Tom, I'm worried about you guys. You keep coming up with all these allegations that are unfounded. I mean,
it's Lewis. It's in. I'm sorry, Lewis. It's in the Mueller report. You can look it up. Right? This is not an allegation. This is a fact. Tom in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Hey, Tom, your thoughts?
Hi, Tom. Tom from the state of Pennsylvania, where my vote was stolen, and it's in the report.
How so?
They said that Manafort was talking to the Russians about the elections in Pennsylvania, so I believe that my vote as a Democrat was stolen.
Well, there's two possibilities. One is that Russians or somebody else hacked into the voting systems of these states, and our voting systems have been incredibly insecure ever since the GOP pushed through the Help America Vote Act in 2002. So that's a possibility. The other possibility is that when the Russians were told, hey, focus on Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, that they did so, and they did it through things like, the troll farms of engaging people in conversations on Facebook on those states or Twitter or whatever it may be. I'm seeing an explosion on my Twitter feed, for example, of people who have, 3,000 tweets and 12 followers. It's just amazing. I mean, if you're reading my Twitter feed and you see some of these, essentially troll-like comments, just mouse over the name and look at, you got somebody, I had one yesterday with like 13,000 tweets and 17 followers. It's like, obviously this is a bot, right? It's just a machine that's just cranking things out over and over again. And go ahead.
And what I'm saying, whether or not you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, our brothers and sisters that are Republicans need to know that our liberty and our Constitution is at threat when we allow foreign entities to do this.
Yes.
Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Come on now.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And the election interference, should be a federal crime. I think it is. That's why 12 or I guess it was 13 Russians got indicted by Mueller. And we'll see where this all goes. Tom, thank you for the call. I mean, this is once again, Manafort gives not only the strategy, the plan to win the election, but also the internal polling data, and then specifically says in this discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Why did Bill Barr lie to the American people this morning? Why has Bill Barr been lying to us for several weeks? Is he going to get paid off at the end of this? I mean, what's in it for him? I don't get it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I would love to hear Bill Barr testify under oath as to why he took this job and why he is doing this. Today we're reading from the Polar Bear Expedition, the heroes of America's forgotten invasion of Russia, 1918-1919. It's a story, by the way, that the Russians remember well, but most Americans are unaware of. This is from the prologue, Nizhny Gora, Russia, January 19th, 1919. They've been expecting it for weeks, hell, months. And so the men of Company 8 of the 339th Infantry Regiment, the Polar Bears, as they would come to call themselves, have stood night and day in 40 below zero temperatures. They stamp their feet and try not to touch bare skin on the frozen barrels of their weapons, lest their flesh be ripped off. They peer through the deep ebony night of their dark log-lined dugouts into the frigid tundra toward the south and east across the ice-choked river and watch for it, wait for it, and wonder how many will come and how they will perform when they do. And they wonder, too, if and how they will ever get out of this place, this frozen Hades, this last place on Earth at the top of the world. And then early on this morning, they do come, a horde of them, dim forms in the distance spread out across the Vaga River. Some on skis, others on snowshoes, all of them armed, like ghost warriors traversing the river's Styx. Hundreds of them to their mere handful of 46. Bolos, the men call them, Bolsheviks. Now a shell flung from upriver, arcing and piercing the barely gray of dawn, flies over the village. Lieutenant Harry Meade awakens with a start, quickly dons his fur hat and overcoat and boots, and races to the far outpost where this scant group of half-dozen men stands guard against not only the enemy, but the tide of history. The sergeant hands him his field glasses, and he squints through the misty, blowing snow. The only sounds, the sharp snapping of frozen tree branches and the dull booming of the river ice cracking. He sees them now, coming on several hundred yards in the distance, and he quickly understands that the company is probably doomed. Now a grayish form enters his view, much closer, and he peels the glass from his eye. Steam comes from his mouth as the thin outpost is now about to be overrun by a nearer group of the enemy, who have snuck closer and rise like dervishes from their concealment in the deep snow. Lieutenant Harry Meade, late of Valparaiso, Indiana, and Detroit, Michigan, stranded more than 200 miles from his regiment's base at Archangel, Russia, doesn't have to speak as the mass of Bolos descends on his small attachment. His men are already furiously firing their machine guns and rifles at this grisly apparition, all while more artillery shells spew over them and land amid them. But Meade yells the words anyway, as if by rote, as if it's not too late, as if any of them has a chance. Fire, Meade orders his men. For God's sake, fire! Chapter 1, The March to Intervention. The preliminaries began on March 9th, 1918, with millions of high explosive and gas shells raining across the front between the northern French cities of Pré and Saint-Quentin. The smothering of the British-held territory continued through the week and beyond, and was topped off with a continuous salvo from 6,700 pieces of German artillery, which began at 4:30 in the morning on March 21st. 5 hours later, heavy mortars began raining death and destruction on the British Fifth Army, and 5 minutes later, the advance of 3 German armies, 69 divisions in all, poured from their trenches and headed east, with the aim of splitting the junction of British and French forces on the southern end of the Somme front and sending the Brits in a panic for the protection of the Channel ports. There was an urgency to the assault, and for good reason. With the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk on March 3rd, Russia had officially taken itself out of the war and relieved the pressure on Germany's eastern front. After years of fighting a two-front war, German forces were now consolidated. Meanwhile, the United States, which had declared war on Germany nearly a year before, had yet to send enough men across the Atlantic to tip the balance in the Allies' favor on the Western Front. But the Yanks were coming. During that spring of 1918, therefore, Germany had a small and unique window in which to act, while the numbers favored them, and so the hand-picked assault troops went forward in great and deadly haste. Above the attackers, 326 fighter aircraft soared into the morning with their opposition just 261 British planes. Following barrages, small teams of stormtroopers appeared out of the deep fog and, ignoring the British strongpoints, cut swaths through the trenches with light machine guns, automatic weapons, and flamethrowers. By the end of the first day of what would be a months-long offensive, the Germans had pushed more than 4 miles through the British and were still advancing. In their wake, they left the bodies of an untold number of defenders, thousands of wounded, and 21,000 prisoners. By March 23rd, 3 huge guns made by the arms manufacturer Krupp had been hauled forward and began sending shells into Paris, 72 miles away. 200 Parisians would be killed on that day alone. Those unlucky Parisians would be but grains of sand in an ocean of war that had enveloped France since August of 1914, when a gray tide of Germans had pushed across the border with Belgium and by early September had very nearly taken Paris. The flood was checked on the Marne River east of the French capital in early September, but the war, it would eventually become known as the Great War, had only begun. The Germans intended to stay, and by the end of 1914, a dizzying series of parallel zigzagging trenches, French, German, and to the north, those of France's British allies, scarred the French soil. The Polar Bear Expedition.
Want to connect with the show?
Okay, a bunch of issues here. The number one, which I'm not hearing from any other sources, which concerns me. It may be that I've just completely got this wrong, although I don't think so, is that in multiple places in this report, the Mueller team, or Mueller, is saying basically, for example, was there collusion on the part, an intent to collude, an intent, was Trump reaching out to foreign governments, specifically Russia in this case, but I'm guessing that there's other governments that were involved as well. Was Trump reaching out to foreign governments to get assistance in the campaign? Which is referred to as collusion. They didn't say that there wasn't. What they said was that we didn't have the time to interview Donald Trump. So we don't know. We can't say. In fact, they talk about how, basically he not only tried to obstruct justice, he was actually, unsuccessful at shutting down the Mueller investigation because, quote, people around him declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests. And basically what Mueller seems to be saying is, Congress, do your work. He says, this is from the Mueller report, although the president has broad authority under Article 2, that authority coexists with Congress's Article 1 power to enact laws that protect congressional proceedings, federal investigations, the courts, and grand juries against corrupt officials to undermine their functions. Applying the court's framework for analysis, we conclude that Congress can validly regulate the president's exercise of official duties to prohibit actions motivated by corrupt intent to obstruct justice. In other words, Congress should pass a law saying that, or impeach him. I mean, basically, when you're tossing it to Congress, you're saying impeach. People lied to Mueller. They deleted evidence. They used encrypted communication devices, which is, Mueller says, why we can't say for sure if this stuff was criminal or it just looks like it. And it continues from there. Anyhow, Alec in Bronx, New York, listening on WBAI. Hey, Alec, what's up?
Hi. First-time caller.
Thank you.
So there was the question regarding why did Barr do this. I just heard, I think it was yesterday, that the International Criminal Court just dropped a case against the Bush administration for crimes. And at the same time, Trump revoked the visa, entry visa for the head judge of the International Criminal Court.
Right. It was not the high judge. It was a prosecutor, but an investigator.
The head prosecutor, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And this could be like a quid pro quo in a way. You could say, I was your hand.
No, I think they dropped the case because they realized that they couldn't prosecute it.
Right. We're not part of the International Criminal Court anyway,
right?
As a country, but I mean, there's stuff that's going on. I believe that Barr also, just by the fact that he underlined different colors, and from what I understand, from what I heard, is that most of the redacted things are the cases that are unresolved.
Yeah, it plays a significant role. Yeah. For example, the whole Roger Stone, there's like a page and a half about Roger Stone that's redacted because he's still subject to prosecution.
Yeah.
So what's your point, Alec?
I think he allowed, at the same time, there might have been like one hand that goes on in politics all the time.
Sure.
And I'm sure it's going on here as well, whether it's this factor or another factor.
Yeah.
But I think he still left the door open. I mean, the report speaks for itself.
It does, and I'm reading this. I'm reading this report as Robert Mueller saying to Congress, "Get your damn act together, guys." And I'm done with that. Alec, thank you for the call. Kate in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Kate, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Been watching you, listening to you since Air America, and I don't know how you manage to keep
thank you, Kate.
call after call. Okay, I wholly agree with the earlier caller who said he had no confidence in Mueller because he was a stinking repugnant or something like that.
Mueller or Barr?
You know, I thought he said with Mueller.
Yeah, there was one person who said that he didn't trust Mueller, but I didn't get a clear understanding of exactly why he was saying that. Mueller is, he was the director of the FBI. He's a pretty straight arrow. Yeah, he's a Republican, and most of the people around him are Republicans. But that seems to go with law enforcement. But what's your objection to Mueller?
Well, can you imagine a Dem ever having been positioned to conduct the investigation against Clinton?
I don't understand. What am I missing here?
Oh, my gosh, there would have been outrage. They never would have stood for that. And I think that Mueller has been built up to be put out there as this character who's just unimpeachable.
Oh, yeah.
In every way, the knight in shining armor.
No, I get all that, Kate. And my objection to Mueller, or my objection to the Democrats saying that they were going to wait for the Mueller report before they decide whether they're going to impeach Trump after Trump has already, we know, from the indictment of Michael Cohen, that Donald Trump ordered a federal felony that had to do with stealing an election. Right? Donald Trump ordered a federal felony that had to do with stealing an election. There's no way in my mind that the American people would have even those 80,000 people in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania who pushed him over the top, that all those people would have voted for Trump if the Karen McDougal story had come out that he was having an affair that lasted a whole year after his wife gave birth to Barron, or the Stormy Daniels that he's getting it on with a porn star, strangely the day before he's seen his other mistress, Karen McDougal. I mean, it was all, and he paid them both $130,000 to keep quiet. And had their stories been made public, had the National Enquirer not participated with him in this scam, in this crime, he would not be president. And frankly, that in and of itself, in my mind, is an impeachable offense, among many others, right? The whole emoluments thing. Every time somebody's got business before the Trump administration, they show up at the Trump Hotel in Washington D.C. His associations with foreign dictators, his corrupt, his money laundering activity. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And most of this is just like laying around on the ground. They didn't need Mueller. So this salvationistic thinking that, we've got to have some external white knight save us has been my objection for a long, long time to this. Well, Nancy Pelosi took that position. She said, this is it. We're going to wait for the Mueller report. Okay, the Mueller report is out. What are we going to do now? And frankly, there's more than enough to impeach this guy. Kate, thank you for the call. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I was just about to address you as Trump. That's how bad it's gotten. I had to stop.
Careful what you're smoking, Johnny.
I'm tempted. Listen, are you still there?
Yeah.
I have a childhood memory from the Nixon days when Nixon went on national TV to brazenly declare he wasn't a crook.
Right.
And he earned every cent he got. And my immediate reaction was that of anger and later frustration, because I knew he was deflecting the real offenses that he and his cohorts committed, among them purposefully cheating. That is, from a child's point of view, from a grade school point of view, he's a cheater.
Yeah, he committed treason to become president.
I didn't know that at the time. All I knew about was him having people break into their opponents' offices at the Watergate.
Oh, that was the 72 election. I was talking about the 68 election. That's where he went to the Vietnamese and said, "Don't cut a deal with Lyndon Johnson. Stay with me, and I'll give you a better deal, and I'll make you rich." And they stayed with him.
That at the time. I found out about that just a few years ago.
Oh yeah, none of us knew about that at the time.
Cheater.
Yeah.
And Nixon's attempt to change the subject on TV back then reminds me so much of the current days with Republicans, and specifically Trump and Barr, in their attempt to change the focus on something other than what they are actually done that's criminal.
Yeah, it's like Trump is running around yelling, I never robbed a bank. I don't rob banks. I didn't even drive the getaway car. And Barr is out there going, yeah, he's never robbed a bank. And, nobody's suggesting that he robbed banks. I mean, collusion is not a crime, right? Nobody's suggesting he didn't commit a not crime.
But he's done that, too, in a way, when you consider filing bankruptcy.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. It's a bad example. I should have said something like selling OxyContin on the street corners. But, basically,
right, I have more respect for people like that. They're trying to make a living. Have a good day.
There you go. Johnny, thank you. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I wish I was there to give you a big high five because you said just about everything I was going to point out, that you have everything other than the Mueller report itself that shows this guy in the White House is a freaking criminal. And you can add to the list of crimes, inciting violence and hate, jeopardizing the safety and lives of innocent people, and which has resulted in murders and so forth. So I don't know what this guy Lewis is talking about and saying there's no evidence of this, no evidence of that. You got Trump's tweets, you got his statements on audio and video and constantly contradicting himself. Yeah. And in the court of law, that spells Troubele.
Okay. You mean as in probable? But yeah, Mike. I'm sorry?
Trouble.
Oh, trouble. Oh, I missed the T. I thought you said P. Yeah, I'm with you. I was trying to figure out what the word was. I'm with you, Michael. And I think that this is the thing that, is slowly dawning on the American people, on the rest of the American people, is that...
Get ready for impeachment.
Yeah, is that the guy in the White House should not be in the White House. And by the way, Donald Trump knows that, and that's why when Don McGahn sat down with him and said, we've had a special prosecutor appointed, he said, oh, my God, this is the end of my presidency. I'm effed. Yeah, you think? Michael, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're processing the Mueller report here and our thoughts on it. And my question, in fact, some people have suggestions. Why is it that Barr took on this job? And welcome back. Linda in Los Angeles. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Just a theory about why William Barr is doing what he's doing. I heard at a talk he is a Federalist, and he's a very close friend of Leonard Leo. And that
you mean he's a member of the Federalist Society? Leonard Leo is the president of that, isn't he?
Yeah. So Barr is a close friend of Leonard Leo.
Oh my God.
And Barr is very pro-unitary executive, a very strong president.
Oh, yeah, he's been that since the 90s. We know that.
Yes. So that's why he's doing what he's doing. He wants to stack the
courts,
judiciary with very conservative judges, and he wants to keep Trump in power, et cetera. That's it.
That makes a lot of sense. Lynn, thank you. Thanks for that. Tom in Stanford, Kentucky. Excuse me. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I just have a little advice to your viewers that when we're reading this report, Mueller has done an excellent job of laying down the framework to interpret what they found. Don't skip over it because it says legal framework of obstruction of justice. It's written really well for an average person to look at that and understand. As I was reading it, I'm sitting there getting flashbacks and going, check, check, check. He did this. Yeah, this applies. It's very good. So don't skip it because you're not a lawyer.
Yeah. So what are the parts? What is the part specifically that you're saying to check?
Well, like what I'm looking at is after the summary in Section 2, the next section is Section 1, background, legal, and evidentiary principles.
Right.
Part A, legal framework of obstruction of justice.
Right.
I'm not going to go through all of it, but basically it says 3 basic elements are common to most of relevant obstruction statutes. and then it lays it out, and it actually calls out what law they use to interpret the evidence they found.
So, and you're thinking that this was laid out here, Tom, for Congress to use in an impeachment hearing?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Right down the road to say, this is where you need to look. This is how you need to look at it.
Right. Right.
You know, in his opinion or his team's opinion. And you want to get through the Barr BS, look at this section and you read it and you go, and you can form your own opinion.
Right.
As I was just sitting there thinking about all of this stuff I've seen this man do in plain sight and his bad actors that worked for him, you sit there and go, yeah. And I'm not that good at remembering it, repeating everything that's in there, but it's easy to read. They're actually calling out case law that applies and what part of that case law. He has little sentence fragments that define what he's referring to.
So this is basically the first appendix after the second section. Is that what you're saying?
It's not even an appendix. It's you read the summary, and the next page, after his conclusion, he starts to go into background of legal and evidentiary principles.
I will track that down when we get off the air, Tom. Thanks for the
short.
Yeah, I get it. Thanks for the heads up on that. I truly appreciate it. And thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Anita in Kernersville, North Carolina. Am I saying that right, Anita?
Yes.
Hey, Anita, what's on your mind today?
Well, I was wondering a long time ago what would make Barr want to work in Trump's administration.
Right.
And I finally decided that he wants to go down in history. Centuries from now, Barr and this administration will be studied by all sorts of classrooms and universities.
So you think that he, you know, sort of like the villains in the Batman cartoons or comic books, that he simply wants to be known for his villainy? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think he wants his name to be mentioned centuries from now.
Yeah.
When I die, no one will remember me 10 years from now, but he will go down in history now. And that's the only reason I can see that would make a 60-some-year-old man come out of retirement.
Yeah, he's
to
60.
work for the Trump administration.
Yeah, he's 68, and yeah, I was wondering, is it the money? I mean, you know, but it may well be. And we had an earlier caller, Anita, who was suggesting that it was because he's good friends with Leonard Leo, who's the head of the Federalist Society, and they are packing the courts right now with hardcore right-wing crazies, and that Bill Barr is a hardcore right-wing crazy, that it was all ideology, that he wants to see the courts packed with people as nuts as he is.
But he has no hand in packing the courts.
Well, he's part of the administration that's packing the courts, and as Attorney General, he could have some influence in that process, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
but I don't know. I think you may be right, Anita. It may be that he wants to be known as the Joker or the Riddler, as the arch villain. Who knows? Anita, thank you for the call. Lynn in Rockford, Illinois. Hey, Lynn.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, you just about covered everything, I think, at this point. But my original reason I called was because I don't understand why we are all being so hung up on this stuff about Trump, because we all saw it with our own eyes. We know it's true. What I think we should be working together to find is a way to make sure that he's not reelected in 2020, which I'm not convinced is the case so far.
Yeah, so, I'm with you, and I do think, though, that pointing out the evidence of his criminality, and it goes way beyond the Mueller report, because the Mueller report's just focusing on collusion with Russia. But pointing out evidence of his criminality is a good first step. Lynn, thank you for the call. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, I'm kind of on a war footing today, because I'm sick and tired of Democrats not getting the point. These people are at war with us. So they got the worst of the worst to push, to push us under the bus. This guy, we know he's guilty. So first of all, we need to start impeaching him now. There's no tomorrow. The more time that it takes to impeach him or to get this thing in motion is, I think, just giving him more chances to get away. I just called Nancy Pelosi's office, and I'm going to try to call her at least twice a week or once a week. But we need to start an impeachment, and I'm hoping everyone can understand that, everything that we work for as far as trying to get health care for our family members right, trying to get jobs right, trying to get the infrastructure right, and have a good education for our kids, it's already going down the drain.
Yeah.
And these Republicans have taken over the airways as far as the news is concerned. All the news is consolidated. No,
it's a giant right-wing echo chamber. I get it, Charles. I absolutely get it, and I agree with you. Thank you, Vincent in Amherst, Mass. Listening to WHMP. Hey, Vincent, what's up?
Well, I think if you keep asking the question about what's in it for Barr,
right.
You have to look back to his previous service as Attorney General under Bush,
where he covered up Iran-Contra and Iraq-gate.
Well, if Bush Sr. had won the '92 election, Barr would have been in line perhaps for a Supreme Court appointment or for certainly an upper federal.
Oh, so Barr is going to be the guy who gets the next Supreme Court job. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's my view of things.
Well, except he's 68. They're not going to put him on the Supreme Court.
No, well, look, it'd be better to have some. They probably will have difficulty with some young radical now, and Barr would be the senior type person who could be allowed to be on the court if a vacancy occurs. And I think that's
amazing.
That's what's in it for Barr.
Okay, well, that's a good theory. Vincent, I want to get one more caller in here. Just Alan, we got about 20 seconds in Tyler, Texas. You got a quick theory?
You bet. William Barr took the job because his last job was as a lobbyist trying to get the AT&T merger to go through, which has since gone through. Trump opposed it because it was with CNN.
Right.
That Trump hates. And, well, the merger went through.
So he took the job because he didn't have anything else to do? Is that what you're saying, Alan?
No, because it finished his lobbying job of getting the merger through.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Alan, thank you for the call. Who knows? I've heard some good theories here today. We'll be back tomorrow. Anything Goes Friday tomorrow. And in the meantime, keep an eye on what's going on. Jerry Nadler right now is holding a press conference in New York City. It's probably worth checking out. And in the meantime, between now and tomorrow, same time, same place, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Please get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.